Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Keeping You Company, a podcast where Rukamani and I chat and ramble on about topics which are interesting to us. Firstly, to keep each other company, because we do enjoy our chats, but also in the process, hopefully, to keep you guys company as well, whether you just want to listen to us. I don't know why that'd be the case, but fair enough if you do, thank you for that. Or if you need something on in the background while you're working or doing chores, or if you're just having a bit of a bad day or a bad week, then we're here to keep you company and help you get you through it with some nice conversation. I'll say Rukamania is back again, of course.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here, keeping us all company.
Hey, I didn't lose you this time, or you didn't lose me. The call. I now remember I had to actually not use the hotkeys. We had a little technical difficulty. I started the podcast, and then the call instantly disconnected. And poor Rook was freaking out.
I just thought it was funny. I started laughing. I think when I picked up the call, I was just incessantly laughing because I wasn't sure if he did it on purpose or not. Because what I heard on my end was, all right, let's go. And then it was like, the call is over.
Bloop. Done. Oh man, I should really keep them in as like outtakes, like Hello Internet used to do.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's an idea. That could be fun.
Oh man, that
I
requires
don't think
editing
that
though.
would come across. Oh, I just talked over you. Sorry.
That's alright, don't you worry. No, I think we heard you. No problem. It might come across, and people be like, "What's happening here? What is happening?" Anyway, how are you, Rook?
I'm doing well. Thank you. It's been busy for me. It's been quite a month. This is sort of the time of year where everyone's trying to rush in some work before the end of the year holidays.
True.
So it gets pretty packed. How have you been?
I've been good. Yeah, I've got probably a little bit of news to fill the people in. Just I can't remember
Ooh.
what we said in the previous podcast, so there might be some news to catch up on. So probably things from our end, of course. New trans. Well, we're recording this late November, folks, but we're not quite sure when you'll see it. We're just going to make the assumption that it's at the what would that be? The beginning of January. um,
Yeah, I think that's when this is most likely going to be coming out.
yeah, we're just we're committing to our schedule of once per month, and at the moment we can't go any better than that. So that's the way it's going to be. But if you're seeing this or hearing this in the middle of December, then you know there's another podcast coming. So that's good. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I don't. So I mean, I guess news from my end. Well, I was gonna say for you, obviously Translation Born. I mean, Translation Born comes out every month, but obviously good stuff on the most recent episode.
Yeah, I
Uh,
always aim for the 14th at the moment. So usually I slip once or twice a year and have to delay by like a week or so. So it's never a full like every single month. I think the longest I've ever gone is 6 months at a stretch without having to push anything back. But I always aim for 1 month between releases, and then occasionally life gets in the way. But
as
thankfully people are understanding.
and as it always, life has its way of doing that. As I guess now
Yeah.
we're talking about, we're now sort of past that date and sort of now towards the end of the month. So what sort of stage of production are you in at this point?
Oh, at this point, I have ended my period of recovery,
Okay,
and
right, rightly
am
so.
yeah, and am back on. This is like we've talked about maybe eventually doing a show like on burnout, and one of the things I discovered was if I don't give myself time to recover for like a week after an episode, bad things happen. The show gets worse. So, uh, I've given myself a little bit of time, and I'm starting to gear up. I'm doing the like editing everything in place so that I can just focus on the super literal translations. And once those are in, I'll begin the process of scripting.
Very good.
At some point, I think it might be interesting to do because this series of Translation Born can only continue on for so long. I think it might be interesting, maybe only to me. This is the problem. I don't know how many other people would care, but it would be interesting to me to do like a an exhaustive behind the scenes type video where it's like this is what I do in an episode of Translation Born.
Hmm? Yeah, I know you're gonna have to you're gonna have to do the influencer thing and have a vlog channel like a behind like an IR a Rookamania IRL channel where you go behind the scenes and you're videoing yourself editing and recording the gameplay footage and all that good stuff. Even
Yeah, I
more
don't
work
even
for
know
you
how
to do, Rook. There, Rook.
I don't even know how I'd go about it. Yeah, it's funny. I talk to Strider sometimes about like ideas for how I could make videos for Fury of Dracula, and he's like, "Man, that sounds like so much work." And from my perspective, I'm like, "That's so much less work than Translation Born. Are you kidding me? I could do that easy."
What's he got in mind? Like gameplay or like guide type
Oh,
videos? What?
so these are my ideas. So like one of the things that Strider does for War of the Ring, the board game that he plays, is he will sit down and run through the Java app and discuss the things that he's thinking and sort of recap the game. And so these games, like in person, a game of War of the Ring takes like 3 hours. On the internet app, you can usually get through a game in about 1 hour. Sometimes they go longer, of course, and sometimes they go super fast, but those both of those are pretty rare. Usually, you're looking about an hour and a half, and but Strider can recap the episode in 20 to 30 minutes. Usually, make it go very quickly, and it gives you a brief synopsis of the game. He also like sometimes he'll put a spin on it, so he's got a whole adventure series where the whole idea is to get a little bit more fun with it and talk about sort of the emergent narrative of what's happening on the board game. And it's like, oh, look at these Nazgul flying around all over the board. What must they be thinking, right? The Witch King's got to keep them all in line. And he'll also use them as an excuse to like introduce members of the community. And these are all things that I saw Strider doing for War of the Ring and thought this could be fun to transplant into Fury of Dracula. Of course, the thing is, War of the Ring, you've got like a log file, recap file that plays back at like super high speed that you can just pause. And so you can recap the game in 20 to 30 minutes. Fury of Dracula, that game is just like you're there for an hour and a half, right? If it's an hour and a half game, you're there for an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to like reduce down into a condensed summary and keep everything followable. And so I thought, well, how could I make it so that I could write out like a 20 to 30-minute recap of a Fury of Dracula game and then edit the video of the game down so that you were only looking at the 20 to 30 minutes that were relevant. And I'd be like, okay, I'd start playing the game. I'd probably supply for the first week, and then I'd take a turn where I just paused on every single hunter's inventory when they like right before I'm about to start moving, and then I can play again as normal. And I'd probably have to take out the sound and rely on the music from the soundtrack, or get really long recordings from the game or something, so that because if I rely on the game sound, it's going to jump all over the place whenever I cut. So I'd have to put in the soundtrack, and I'd have to, of course, I like to write scripts, so I'd write up a script for the recap of the game, and then I'd have to cut everything to fit and put it all together. So it's a lot of video editing, but and so I tell you that I'll say that to Strider, and he'll be like, "Man, that's insane." And I'm like, "Well, this is like nothing compared to putting together an episode of Translation Born. Do you know how much I do on that series?"
And then so you've once you get this Bloodborne done, then you'll be I don't know getting 10 videos of Fear of Dracula out a month. Be like, oh, this is a piece of piss compared to what I did before. You can show
I
us
don't know
what
if
you
I
can
go.
do.
I don't know if I
Breakneck
go
speed.
that far, but at some point, right? At some point, Translation Born has to end. I have to tell myself this. It's it's unbelievable sometimes to me. I have so I'm closing up like in terms of stuff that's happening in the game of Bloodborne. Just so people are aware, I've recorded. I haven't edited and released the episodes yet, but I've recorded up to the end of the DLC. And the DLC in Bloodborne takes place like right at the very end of the game, is sort of the sweet spot when you should start playing it. And I've gone through in a separate series a bunch of these like, optional areas called Chalice Dungeons and gotten so that the only thing left that's of major story importance down in there is just this one boss fight that I can go into. So essentially, I'm at this point where, uh, in terms of the story of the main story of the game of Bloodborne, there's going to be like after I think it's going to be like January that the episode that I currently have footage for comes out, and I'm through the main storyline of the DLC. And after that, it's going to be just like if I just wanted to play the game, I could probably be done in another episode or two because it's just a boss rush and it's over. But I've also got a backlog of items that I haven't been able to talk about because I've been trying to structure each episode thematically, and
Right.
I only cover 3 to 4 items and or dialogues per episode. So the pace of the episode is very slow. So even though it looks like I'm almost done covering Bloodborne, it's probably going to be I can't even estimate, right? It's like I've got this whole list of more items to talk about where I'm just going to have to kill time running through the chalice dungeons that don't have any story content so that I can focus my analysis of the translation of these remaining, like some of these items are pretty important.
Hmm.
Um, and you never know because I don't just come at it from the perspective of what's important for the game. I also come at it from the perspective of what are some important lessons to take away from these translations as translators,
Right.
or as people who are interested in one language or the other.
Hmm.
So some item that maybe doesn't have a lot of like lore import could be tremendously important linguistically. And I'm thinking about
Sure.
maybe because this item is so important both in terms of lore and potentially in terms of translation, there's one particular item that I'm thinking maybe I just want to do an entire episode where I only talk about this item.
Hmm.
With like one of the thirds of umbilical cord. It's one of the most important items in the game. And if I do that, that's just another, whole month of, so it's probably going to be like another year. I don't know. But at some point, it's theoretically at some point in the future, I will be done with Translation Born. And I haven't really decided what I'm going to do after that point. But it does free me up to all these hypothetical Fury of Dracula videos and like series that I have in my mind can suddenly like realistically enter production if I can speak.
I mean, you're saying that now, but we put a prediction in, viewers. What's the betting? We'll be continuing this on. I don't know what episode we'll be on 2034, 10 years from now. Be like, how's translation board going, Rook? You getting there? I've got two more items to go. But no, I get it. Like, there's a lot. As you said, there's a lot of things to. I mean, as I said, there's so many angles that you can approach from it, right? In terms of
Mm-hmm.
lore and then linguistics, and then potentially both, and then storyline and thematics. So yeah, you've got a lot to cover. So as I said, it's been now 8 years that it's been going. So you've
Just about.
covered
Yeah.
a huge
We're
amount of ground in
just
that time.
we're just on the like anniversary point because I started it in
Hmm.
January of 2017.
Maybe it might just be a 10-year project, a Rook, and then that'll be it.
It might
Yeah.
be a 10-year project. That's a nice round number for like estimating.
Hmm.
Maybe I've actually got 2 years and I'm fooling myself.
Or you'll make it 2 years, right?
Yeah.
You'll
Well, that's
find
the
a
other
way.
thing, right? Is it takes like every time I do one of these things where it's like, oh, I'm just going to talk about this one item for an episode. That means I'm only going to talk about that one item for an entire month, right? It's the sort of thing where it's like it doesn't take that long to play through the game of Bloodborne. How have you been doing it for 8 years? Well, if you think of it like I'm making about 10 to 15 minutes of gameplay progress per month, you understand.
Yeah, it doesn't seem
Yeah, and I have thought about
crazy
like
then.
how could I maybe do a Q&A episode? How could I maybe because the 10-year anniversary of Bloodborne itself is coming up in March, and I'm thinking I want to do something for that. What do I want to do?
Hmm.
So yeah, it's all like, and I'm debating because this is another thing that happens to me. Going back to the theme of burnout, I'm debating taking a break just so that I can recover because I've just been going on Translation Born for 2 years, and it would be nice to have a little bit of a break.
Sure. And
I don't know. We'll see what happens.
maybe once you've like once like the main storyline, you can reassess and just sort of see and go,
Right.
okay, before I dive into all of this, backlog footage of items I've got, that might be a point maybe just to take. And obviously,
Yeah.
I know the viewers will be expecting a video, but that might not be a bad idea just to take even a month off and just be like, okay, do I really want to go
Yeah.
down this rabbit hole?
That's currently what my thinking is of taking. So it's actually going to line up pretty well because if the episode that I'm thinking is going to be like the end of the main storyline of the DLC does indeed come out in January, like the middle of January, and then there's probably one more episode that I should do after that, just to fully wrap up the remaining loose ends of the DLC, and then once that episode's done, that's going to be next February, and the following month in March, if I remember correctly, that's the official like 10-year anniversary of Bloodborne's release as a game. So that's the
Oh,
perfect excuse
amazing.
for me to switch, take a month off of Translation Born, maybe two, and do something special for the anniversary.
Hmm. That'd be nice. Yeah.
Yeah,
I can just
but we'll see what happens. Part of me
like.
also just wants to be done. I've been doing this series for a long time, man. I've got ideas for Fury of Dracula. Part of me wants to be done. So there's another part of me that's pushing me that's just like, just keep doing it, just keep going, and it will be over.
You're getting there. You're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
That's right.
I've got the same situation because I want to get back into making sort of guide and strategy videos for Fear of Dracula, especially now I've got like the channel intro video that you can see on the
Hmm.
homepage of the channel, and it also appears. I haven't put it into this podcast. I realize a lot of people watching this podcast might not be interested in Fear of Dracula and stuff, but all the Fear of Dracula videos are going to have that. I've got that intro up, and I've written in there strategy guides, which is true. There are strategy guides I've made for Fear of Dracula, but I want to really sort of get into that a lot more and really start getting that out as sort of as a consistent amount, a consistent content on the channel. So I've got loads of ideas of stuff I want to do. There's a big one which is like Dracula tips and tricks because I made that a Hunter
Hmm.
one probably about 18 months ago now at this point, and I said I'm going to do a Dracula one, and I still haven't done it. It's all been scripted. The script is somewhere in this office. I look at the mess
Hmm.
around me. I just need to actually make the PowerPoint. I've started one on Hunter ally cards. Will that be out by the time this podcast comes out? I hope so, but I can't guarantee it. So,
Yeah.
well, I've got loads of ideas of stuff I want to do.
Yeah,
Um,
you've got some audio footage of me at least from for
uh,
why we
oh,
love Fury of Dracula.
oh man, I was actually thinking about that today, and I do all my best thinking in the shower, and I was sitting there going, oh
Hmm.
my goodness, I have to make that video, but I'm now going to try and find all of that audio that I now if I was clever I would have put it into a folder. I think I did, but I can't
Hmm.
remember. And the problem is there are some people who didn't record audio, which is fine because I didn't specify it had to be audio. They could just send me. I mean, maybe we should make it clear what we're talking about. This is probably now at least a year ago. I can't remember if it
Yeah,
was Christmas of 22 or Christmas of 23. I don't
I'm pretty
remember,
sure it
but
was exactly a year ago.
a year ago. That probably makes sense based upon. Yeah, I wasn't in the tournament. That probably makes sense. Yeah. So I put a request to the Dracula community and I asked, um, I want to do a video about why I love Fear of Dracula so much. But instead of making it about why I love Fear of Dracula, why can't we make it about why do we love Fear of Dracula? And everybody can put in, if they want to, their own contributions, either in audio form or in text form, and I'll put it up on the screen and we'll hear the opinions of lots of different people. And then, I mean, I know you recorded a really nice piece, Quincy did, I'd chip in with stuff. Other people did too, but now I can't remember who, and I don't want to say incorrect names. But there's a really nice spread of just different sort of perspectives on the game, which I thought was really neat. And it was also just a show, and also like to highlight the community and stuff. I thought it was a really nice thing to do. But it just, for whatever reason, that video never got edited together. I had everything. It was just a case of stitching it all together and me then linking everything. I think as then New
Hmm.
Blood kicked off,
Yep.
which I don't think I had expected to do, but it just kind of happened very organically. And then we had the Immortal update, and then the Immortal Invitational. So it's just it's just sitting there staring at me like, come on, like it's like the spices that you've got in the back of the cupboard that you haven't been using. Every time you open it, it's like,
Yep.
hello, I'm here. When are you gonna
Hmm.
use me? Um, so yeah, I need to actually. I probably should make that first before I make any other like strategy videos. Roscoe and I have spoken about trying to redo the Hunter event tier list because now, not that it's outdated, but you know, the the video production on the channel is a little bit better, and then I've got more opinions on cars. I've got more experience under my belt, so that'd be kind of a nice thing to do. But then we're thinking, well, that's going to be 2 or 3 hours out of our day to do that.
Hmm.
So yeah, just too many things, too
Yep.
many ideas,
Yep.
not enough time. So it's a case of sitting down and just doing it. But
Yep. I can absolutely relate. If
um,
you do need my audio again, by the way, I still have that saved. I hold on to things until they come out. So
I knew
because
you
that
would,
video,
and if
yeah,
not, I'd probably doing a search in Discord. I'd probably find it anyway. But thank you, just on the off chance. Then thank you. I think at this rate, because it's so late, I will probably put out another community request because there's so many new people have come in. I might just
yeah,
ask them.
yeah, I think that's totally fair.
So it might be a. I mean, if I can get myself organized, that might be a New Year release. That might be quite a nice thing to do for the turn of the year.
That would be great. That would be perfect for like a New Year's release if you can get it done.
I think, I mean, there's nothing in terms of my timing that I can't get it done. I just need to get organized and do it. So, yeah.
Yep.
Speaking of Dracula, because we talked about it in the previous podcast, about the tournament status, and I think at that point, I think I was in the quarterfinal, not the I can't remember. I think I was in the quarterfinal, and I was saying I might be out by the time I might be eliminated from the tournament by the time um,
That's right. We were
that podcast
speculating on that.
we were. Well, I can say to the viewers that I am in the final. By the time,
Hooray!
yay! Thank you, hype. So by the time you see the previous podcast, the final might have been played. By the time you see this podcast, the final would have definitely been played. But obviously, it's all speculation. I don't even know who my opponent is because the other semi-finals gone to a tiebreak.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't got a clue who I'm against. I don't know if I'm going to win. So it's like Schrodinger's like cat, right? When you're listening to this, I've either won or I haven't won. Until you open the box, you don't know what it is yet.
Right.
Or unless you saw the video. Then fair
If
enough.
you, yeah, if you don't click on the next podcast, you'll never know. It will forever be in a state of both Scott Stewart having won and lost.
That's true. That's true. That'd be so weird for then people in the community if this turns out to be like then the February podcast. I'm like, I won the League of Dracula, and it was like that was 2 months ago, mate. Like, get
Yeah.
over yourself.
Yeah, that could be funny.
Well, we'll see. But yeah, just let people know in case they were wondering. The other thing that's happened to me is again, I don't know if I mentioned it in the previous podcast, but it's something I've kind of mentioned in general throughout. I mean, we will do a podcast about language learning, but very recently, as of a few days ago, as of the time of recording, I actually did the official B2 level Spanish exam.
Ooh,
So I don't know.
how
Does
did
B
that go?
two does B2 mean? I don't. I know in Europe they love talking about B2 and C1 and all this stuff. Is that something that you're aware of?
It means nothing to me.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, it seems to be a
Yeah.
European thing. Okay, so the easiest way is in. There must be a European thing then.
Well, there are
We
other language like tests. So for English, there's TOEIC, which is what a lot of my students were studying for in Japan. I think there's also TOEFL. There are
Yeah,
a couple of different.
yeah. Maybe we're pronouncing it wrong. I've only ever heard it in Spanish as TOEFL, but maybe it's wrong.
Okay.
I haven't got a clue. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
heard of
TOEFL could make
TOEFL,
sense too. Yeah,
TOEFL or
yeah,
TOEFL.
TOEFL and
Yeah.
TOEIC. Yeah, and so those are the two like English as a foreign language test.
Yes,
The
yes,
big
yes, yes.
names that like I said, I would help students study for that when I was teaching in Japan. In when it comes to Japanese, there are the biggest one. There are a couple of different ways that you can test yourself, including if you're like a native Japanese speaker, you can take this very specific kanji test, which gets very hard. Um,
Ooh.
but if you're someone like me who's a foreigner looking to get a measure of your ability to speak Japanese, you can take the Japanese language proficiency test, and that one is rated. It used to be I think it used to be just like level 1, level 2, level 3, whatever, and they changed it like while I was in the process of studying for this certification. They changed the name scheme and also how they broke up each level. And now it's called you get N1, N2, N3, etc., where lower is actually better. So N1 is the highest certification.
Oh. Okay.
So I'm aware of like language proficiency tests, but I don't know the specific system. Like B2 doesn't mean anything to me.
Okay, so I've just looked it up. So the reason why you wouldn't have heard of it is because it is part of the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. So the reference levels A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2 only seems to be a European thing.
Okay.
Um, but it is a system so that, uh, especially because and we've talked about no, maybe that's the thing I only talked about individually. I don't think you were here when I spoke about that, but there was a definite episode where I talked about the European Union and how the European Union functions, and one of the things it does, it allows for freedom of movement of citizens. So people are, in theory, able to cross country borders without checks, and a European Union citizen. So if you're a citizen of a European Union country, you technically have the right to live, work, and retire in any other European Union country. There are checks and balances. It's not as simple as that. There are
Hmm.
ways that you can get deported and stuff or checked on, but in theory, that is how it works. So because of that, if you've got all these people going backwards and forwards between borders, it gets complicated very quickly if everyone uses their own individual grading system or framework for anything.
Hmm.
So what they're
Right.
trying to do across a lot of the education sector is try to standardize everything so you can
Hmm.
better understand, you can relate things. Um, uh, and like even like university structures are quite different. I had a conversation with my wife very recently, and she remarked to me that the way that at least at that time when she did her Erasmus in Scotland, one subject in Scotland was the equivalent of maybe 3 or 4 subjects in her home Spanish university based upon the number of credits. It's
Oh
very,
wow.
it's the systems are very different, and I know like it's not going to be completely standardized. That's ridiculous, but there has to be some sort of equivalence. So the way they've done
Hmm.
it is they've set up for language learning. They set up this common framework. So it's structured based upon these 6 reference levels. So all you have to do is if you're writing on a CV, or if you're saying it out loud or going to school or something, or a foreign university, and you say, I have C1 level in French or whatever, then they would understand what that means. They understand
Hmm.
the level in theory that you have based upon
Hmm.
that thing. Um, so I've done B2, which is the upper middle one, which is I think the term would be something like upper intermediate.
Oh,
It's not
okay.
advanced level. B2, to give it as a description, would be that you are an independent speaker of the language. You can hold your own in most day to day conversations, and you
Hmm.
have some working proficiency. It's not perfect.
Hmm.
But in terms of, I mean, knowing it since I've taught B2 English, so I can see it from
Hmm.
the English perspective. In theory, I guess it always depends on the student, right? But a person who has B2 in a level should have been taught most. I mean, they should know most basic grammar rules. There'll always be
Hmm.
exceptions and weird things, but they know all. They've been taught all the verb tenses, so in
Hmm.
theory they can discuss things in any sort of situation, um, and they have basic vocabulary for almost all situations. Um, so that's the level that I've gone for. B2 level, just to give a bit of context, especially for English, a lot of Spanish universities now require students to have B2 level in English in order to verify their degree, even if it's not an
Oh
English
wow.
degree. They're trying to push English a lot because obviously English is just so widespread now, and it's very hard to. They want to promote, a new
Hmm.
generation of workforce who are international and can, work for international companies and such. So having English is a huge advantage. Um,
Hmm.
I was looking recently to try and do maybe some further study over here without going into a huge amount of detail, partly for time, but also just for partly my own privacy. But I'm looking to change fields a little bit. So I'm looking at the possibility of maybe doing some higher sort of tertiary education just to help with that process. And in order to
Hmm.
get into a Spanish university to do that, I would need at least a B2 in Spanish.
I
Um,
see.
Even though I've looked at the modules and stuff, and I think B2 is too low in
Yeah.
terms of the entry requirements they set is B2. Um, C1 is advanced level, so the difference between going from B2 to C1 is you might get taught some niche grammar, but in theory it's mostly revision of grammar. The big thing between
Hmm.
B2 and C1, at least in English anyway, is you get thrown a huge amount of vocabulary. Learning a
Yep.
lot more idiomatic expressions, collocations, synonyms, and all that sort of stuff. And you're supposed to use then the grammar that you've got at a much sort of greater capacity. You're able to switch between verb tenses more easily, fewer mistakes, more sort of fluidity and fluency with your speech, all that sort of stuff. C2 is, I mean, you don't have to be native to have C2, but and not all natives have C2 level either. But if you have C2 level, you speak as good as a native, or maybe better than a lot of native speakers. Um, I've
Wow.
looked at C2 tests in English. I've not to blow my own trumpet or anything, but I think I would pass them, but I would definitely
Hmm.
not ace them. I would not get 100% in them. There's definitely vocabulary that I don't know, especially if it's more
Hmm.
of a literature poetic nature. If it's technical
Hmm.
jargon based upon my academic background, I'd get that. But if it's any sort of more poetic type language, nah, no chance. I wouldn't be able to describe it at all, and I wouldn't know what's going on. So, and if it's on idioms that I've never heard of, no
Hmm.
chance. I'd have to guess my way through it. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, I mean C2 is very hard. It's very impressive when you see foreigners who've obtained C2 level. They have an exceptionally high. I mean, if we're talking about English, they have an exceptionally high level of English. The assumption is once you finish your secondary education,
Hmm.
a native speaker will have C1.
Okay.
So just to give it an idea of where I am on the scale of where I'm
Hmm.
pitching. Um, so yeah, that I've done it, which is good.
Nice. Do you
Um,
have a good feeling? I mean, I don't expect you to have the results yet, since it sounds like this is very recent. But
it was very recent, and probably the problem with these sort of tests is that they can take quite a long time to get the results through.
oh yeah, it's the
There's
same,
certain
and
checks and
it's the
balances,
same for the Japanese language proficiency tests.
right?
I know
Because
some people who take it and they expect results within like a week or something, and it's just like, no, no, it's gonna be
no,
months.
they they have started, at least for English learning. They have done some where the results come through much quicker because often they're digital tests where rather than being the exam is pitched at certain levels, so you're saying you're doing the B2 or the C1 exam, you do an exam where there's a mixture of different questions, or maybe the questions just get progressively harder,
Hmm.
and it calculates based upon the test what your level is approximately. And you can use these tests to get an idea of your level, or if you need it to get a quick entry into a university course, you can use it. But the thing is with, so for an example, one of the big brands in the UK, from a UK institution, I should say, for language learning is Cambridge English. I think
Hmm.
TOEFL is the American equivalent. So, but a lot of language schools over here teach Cambridge. A lot of them do TOEFL, or they do a mixture. It
Hmm.
just depends. Um, but for them, the way they say it is if you do the official B2 exam, you have that certification for life.
Hmm.
Whereas if you do like the more sort of digital ones, which are more rapid, then even if you get the results quicker, that's only valid for maybe 6 months or a year. So you can
I
then
see.
use it to judge your level, or if you need to get a quick entry into a university course, you can get it.
Hmm.
But then it's not valid anymore. I don't know how I feel about language certification for life. I think that's kind of stupid, but that's just my honest opinion of it. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, I think you as a language learner as well will agree if you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah,
So,
for sure. I mean, I think the thing about language certification in general is that I think it's very difficult to do. And
right.
depending on depending on what you're using it for, you're going to have different things that you even want on the test that you want to test for.
Hmm.
So, like, yeah, it's tough. It's tough. I definitely agree that if you want, like, it's a little bit questionable to have a certification that you get for life on the one hand. On the
Hmm.
other hand, if I had to re-certify myself, because I took the JLPT, the Japanese language proficiency test, I got N1, and
Oh,
that's
very good.
it's one of these ones where
Congratulations.
you get it for life. No, thank you. Um, it's one of these ones that you get for life, and it's like, okay, I don't really need it for life though. What I need it for is to start getting jobs, right? And
Right.
then what I want is for them not to ask if I have N1 or N2 or N3 or whatever. What I want is for them to look at the work that I've done and say,
Hmm.
"Can you do this job?" Right?
Sure.
So that's sort of what I value more than continuing to redo that certification. If I had to redo it continually, I'd get annoyed.
Yeah, no, I understand. I understand.
But yeah, so it's one of these things where yeah, I think I agree with you that like if you look at it from an outside perspective and you're thinking in theory, okay, as a way to evaluate someone's language ability, it's going to fluctuate. And yeah, lifetime certification doesn't make a lot of sense. But then in terms of the practical like use it's going to be put to, I'm glad I only had to take it once.
Mhm. I think it's like a lot of things, right? It depends on the it's not the system, it's the person, right? If
Right.
you've got somebody like yourself who is using your language skills, um, and you are using them on a daily basis, you're constantly reinforcing the language that you've learned, and even if there's some stuff you've forgotten, you know you've got tricks to be able to sort of bridge that gap if it's necessary for your work, and you need it for a very specific type of task, right? You're using the language in a
Right.
very particular way. Someone like me,
Right. But that's the other thing too, is that sorry to cut you off, but the
oh my
thing
god,
that I've noticed is it sort of sharpens like the specific use case for so for my language skills, I'm very good at understanding Japanese because that's what I'm doing all the time.
sure.
I haven't had to produce Japanese in an effective way in like
Mm,
what since I moved back, so more than 10 years. So those skills, I mean, they're not gone. I can communicate in Japanese if I need to, but I'm nowhere near as sharp in those skills as I used to be. Whereas my understanding, my level of like just pure comprehension is higher than it's ever been.
yeah.
So you get this weird sharpening effect where it's like, yeah, I'm good at what I do for my job, and that's what I need to be good at. But can you drop me into a given context in Japan and have me communicate effectively? I don't know anymore. I need to go back. I haven't even because I used to go back once a year, and I feel like oh I need to get back to Japan. I feel like I'm getting out of date and my skills are getting a little too rusty. But
Mm.
that's just my own personal thing. But sorry, you can continue with
No,
your
but
point
I mean
now.
that's completely natural. It doesn't have to be language learning. It could be anything, right? Goodness sake. I mean, I was talking about this with this came up in the language exam. Actually, funny enough, we're talking about memorization and things in. Oh no, that was a practice, not the real exam. Talking about memorization in classes and few exams and stuff. I was like, but it's the same. Like, how much stuff could we remember from things we did at school or things we did in a
Yeah.
previous job 5 years ago? I mean, maybe we can, but also maybe
Hmm.
we can't. And it's very natural if you don't use a skill, you lose it. But then the skills you do use, you're constantly, you're always working on them and just getting even more efficient at them. That's completely
Hmm.
normal. Um, and I agree. In the case of for you, right, because you're doing it for your job, you've got something else to fall back on. You've got your work experience. You don't need
Right.
quote unquote need quote unquote this certification because you say I've got this work experience. For someone like me,
Hmm.
if I continue to live in Spain and work
Hmm.
and be in the system, well, my language level's never gonna. Well, I hope, unless something catastrophic happens, it'll never go down. Will it go up?
Hmm.
Well, that depends on me and how I approach the language and stuff. Um, but I can base it on that, right? So even if, say, 15 years into the future, the B2 certification I've got, if I get it, I was going to say, I mean, I
Hmm.
do think I've passed. I mean, I'd be very disappointed if I haven't because it went pretty well. Not perfectly, but I think it went well enough. And I was always
Good.
passing like the practice tests I was doing, and it didn't feel any different to that. So, you know, if I do get the B2 certification, then in 15 years' time, it's only a line on my CV. It's not extremely relevant. The more relevant thing is
Hmm.
I've been living here for 20 years or whatever. And
Right.
I've been using the language day in and day out. That is way more important than a piece
Hmm.
of paper that says I've got B2 level or whatever level it is. Um, so I just think of it from the opposite perspective when I've taught students and they've studied really
Hmm.
intensively and then they pass the exam by the skin of their teeth. And I do think, oh, how many of you are actually, be honest, in 10 years' time, you're going to still have B2 level of English, you can actually communicate with me?
Hmm.
It does make me wonder.
Yeah.
And still also like it depends. I mean, I'm not saying the pass mark should be higher. I'm not saying that because you have to cut the cutoff has to be somewhere. But if you're saying the
Hmm.
pass mark is 60%, then you're getting B2 level or what any level. It doesn't. It's not just B2. Any level you could pass with 60. So it means there's still 40% of the language that you're not at that level at.
Right.
And then that asks the question. Well, what if you do it based upon conversations in real life that you get through 60% of your conversations in real life? Is that good enough? I don't know. It depends.
Yeah,
Right?
it sort of depends on what you do with it, right? And it depends.
Right.
That's the thing that, and eventually, because we are going to talk about like a language learning podcast, we've talked about that as a subject. But that's one of the like key things that I'm probably going to bring up again when we do talk about it is like, what's the point of learning the language, right? So when
Yes.
you're
Yeah.
When you're going to learn a language, it's for a reason. What's that reason? And depending on that reason, you can expect different outcomes, right? Like if the reason is the college says I need to get this certification and that's the only reason, well then who cares? Who cares if you get the certification and then your level falls back down again, aside from a general interest in knowledge and education, right? But like if it's just a means to an end, then it's fine, I think, if it's just a means to an end. Whereas if you're hoping to do more, right? If you're hoping to like be a translator or you're living in the country and you need it to get around, right? Like these are all different cases where it's like, okay, no, the certification is a means to a different end. And that other end is also more important, but it requires a maintenance of the language level that you wouldn't necessarily get if you're just cramming.
Right. No, I
And the
agree.
real tragedy is when you're just cramming and you should be building for the long term.
Yeah. No. I think the thing is
Yeah.
like the way the exams are designed are to test your long-term knowledge and your
Mm-hmm.
intuition with the language. They are not cramming exams. You can only
Okay.
cram your practice, but
Mm-hmm.
you can't cram your knowledge. It's not a memorization test, which is good. I think that's the way
Yeah.
to do it. It's not like other school or university type exams where you just cram stuff in and just hope it sticks.
Mm-hmm.
It is very obvious if a person has not practiced the language over and has gone through that learning process. It's not that type of exam, which is good. And I've said, I mean, when we talk about that, when we do that podcast, we'll talk about it more. We can compare, but I'm really happy that even if I don't pass the exam, I can say that I actually speak Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when I look at, you know, French and German that I learned at school, even though I got really high marks in the exams at school, I couldn't say with any sort of sincerity that I spoke the language because
Right.
I didn't. The
Mm-hmm.
exams were done in such a way that they don't encourage a proper learning of the language. You don't
Mm-hmm.
get punished if you don't learn the language properly. Whereas this type of
Right.
exam you do. Um, in what
Well, that's
maybe
good.
so, but no, I feel hopefully maybe we can do maybe the next podcast if we finish the topic on Japan today. We can maybe do next podcast. Could maybe do language learning, and maybe by then I might have got the results, which would be cool. But
Yeah. That would be great. Yeah, I think that would be a good one. Hopefully a victory lap for you.
I hope so. I mean, I've got. I mean, I'm a bit of a perfectionist with exams, so I do have doubts. But if I think really honestly about it, I can't see a way that I failed the exam unless there's something that I've horribly missed.
Mm-hmm.
The speaking exam the day before, I had to do the speaking exam on a different day to the rest. The speaking went really well. The topics just aligned. So I had I had a choice of topics for the three different tasks, and the choices
Mm-hmm.
just fell on my plate in terms of the first one was about I've got it in Spanish, so I've got to try and think of how to translate this into English, and it's not coming to me. Uh, food like childhood. No, oh god, oh that doesn't make
Mm-hmm.
sense. Oh, it's so hard when you got it in Spanish. It should be easy. Like food consumption for young people. Like in Spanish, I mean, any Spanish people, alimentación infantil.
Ah.
Like what sort of food do young people consume? Basically,
Mm-hmm.
that's much easier. um, and the only reason that is a good topic for me is because literally a couple of weeks ago, I attended a conference on the topic of food production and food consumption. Um, and I already have quite strong opinions about the topic anyway, because I've actually done research about it and watched academic talks about it. Not that it's my main field, but it's just something I've grown
Mm-hmm.
very interested in, just personally in my life about sort of diet and food
Mm-hmm.
consumption stuff. So as I saw that, I was like,
Cool.
oh, this is just perfect. And then the second one was about I picked a couple who were arguing about household chores. I mean, that's just my wife and I on a daily basis
Okay.
anyway, so
Yeah.
that was great. Um, and then the third one was how to be a good teacher. And I was just
Ah,
like,
there you
and
go.
I was just like, oh come on, like,
Mm-hmm.
this is just if this isn't a dream speaking exam, then I don't know what is. And then The rest went fine. I mean, the problem is it's quite good the way they try to do these exams now. Same with the English one. They've tried to make it more international. It used to be back in the day the English ones were all very British English accents and all
Mm-hmm.
very posh people. Now they try to
Mm-hmm.
expand it with more, even though they're still speaking standard English. They got accents from different parts of the UK, and then you will get audios with an American person, with an Australian person. Same with the Spanish one. You suddenly get a writing task where you have to write about you don't have to write about Argentina, but it's
Mm-hmm.
the topic is Argentina, so you have to write Argentina in the text. Or I got in my listening exam, yeah, an interview with an Argentinian person and then a Colombian person, and then those accents are quite different, and then that freaks me out a bit. So those are then the
Yeah.
two tasks which I just find most difficult anyway, because you don't have
Mm-hmm.
time to really understand the questions while you're listening. So that I
Yeah.
found that quite tough, but in general, I think it went well. So
Good.
hope,
Well, I'm hoping it went well for you. I'm hoping that when we do our language podcast, you'll have a positive result.
I hope so. We'll have to see. I'll let you know when I do, and then yeah, we'll. I have no idea when I'll find out the result. I'm in the dark, so hopefully it won't be too long.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. Oh yeah, the footage by the way for this podcast is there's just scenery of Edinburgh. That's what we got today.
Oh, nice.
Parks and a famous hill in the centre of the city called Arthur's Seat, and the
Hmm.
crags around it, and then Carlton Hill as well, where there's a half-finished Parthenon on the
Ooh.
top of the hill. And that's because back in the old days, because Edinburgh's a very cosmopolitan a very cosmopolitan city and full of the Enlightenment and all this sort of thing and research, like in terms of philosophy and economics and science. It was known as the Athens of the North. So the city council, this is back I think in the 1800s. The city council were like, right, let's build a Parthenon at the top of the hill because it's Athens of the North, right? So we have to have a Parthenon. So they started building it,
Wow.
and then the city ran out of money.
Oh yeah.
So there's just this perfect metaphor for Scotland. We're very ambitious, but we don't think things through properly. There's this half-finished Parthenon at the top of the hill. Um,
Oh, that's funny.
it's cool. You can go there and grab a cup of coffee and sit there and just chill, and it's really nice up there. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
sounds
Edinburgh.
nice.
Beautiful Edinburgh. There you go.
Awesome. As usual, I'll look forward to watching it back when this goes live.
Hey, well, we should unless there's any more follow up because obviously we're recording this before the previous podcast comes out, so we can't really talk about direct follow up. Hopefully, people enjoyed it, especially as it started getting very political and slight tirade toward the end.
Yeah, things
Hopefully, we
got
didn't
weird at the
offend all the
end.
drinkers and the smokers, and I'm so
Yeah.
sorry if we did. Oh, I did. I was the one saying rude stuff. So yeah, we're going back onto the abroad in Japan topic since we overran last time, so we can
Mm-hmm.
see if we. So I had a panic because I messaged you before the podcast. I said I'm ready about half an hour
Mm-hmm.
early, and then I suddenly realized, where are my notes? Because I wrote down all the notes and
Oh.
stuff, and I couldn't find them. But I did find them
Uh-oh.
eventually. That'd been awful if I
Oh,
didn't have them,
good.
but I've got them. Um, so if you want, we can jump in. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Nothing. Again, like you said, we haven't the other episode hasn't come out, so we can't really address direct feedback, unfortunately. But we can plow on with the other part of the topic. So let's learn more about abroad in Japan, the experiences. I will say, having had I don't know how long it's been, but maybe about a month to reflect on it. I'm less and less sure that the topic that we sort of discussed as like chinmoku, where they'll suddenly go silent, a room of Japanese people will suddenly go silent. I'm
mhm.
less and less confident that I gave a great that I can actually relate to that point. And I wonder if maybe this is one of those things that I was talking about, sort of as a preamble to the last main topic that we covered, where I know a lot about Japan, right? I lived there for 5 years. I studied all about the country before that. I've walked the length and width of the country. I've got a lot of expertise there. I'm working as a translator, but I don't know everything. There are all sorts of things that I haven't had in my experience or that haven't come up for me, and where I'm sure Chris Broad is much more of an expert than I am. And that is an aspect of his experience that I've, like I said, I've less and less certain that I can relate to it, because I recall moments of silence at morning meetings, and morning meetings in general are very, um, they're way more prevalent in Japan than I expected them to be, um, which was its own sort of mini culture shock for me. But yeah, I just thought I'd offer that up because I know the last time I was saying usually someone calls for that, and I don't know if this is just my nature, sort of like you were saying a little bit earlier. My nature is also to question myself all the time,
Oh,
and so I've had a
yeah,
month to sit
I
back and
can relate
question
to that.
myself and be like, but have I really had that experience?
Well, at least you didn't question yourself so much to start writing messages to me at 2 a.m.
Yeah, not this time.
So we're like, Rook sent me messages. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's okay. I mean, also, it's not just a case. It's not just a fact of being one person being an expert more than another, right? You have to be. Maybe I might have misunderstood the text. That's also possible. But I think it's also a case of you need to be in the right time or place to experience a certain thing.
absolutely.
If you didn't experience it, that just doesn't mean you're not an expert in something. It's just you weren't there, or you weren't in the right part of the country, or with the right people, or whatever it is. There's a lot of a little bit of sort of serendipity kind of required to sort of discover certain things
Hmm.
about people or culture or whatever. So that's okay. It'd be interesting to see if anybody else mentions anything about it. When we
Agreed.
get the feedback. I'm going to quickly. I'm not very good podcast listening, but I'm just going to take off my jumper because it's now getting toward it's winter here, so we got the heating on. But I'm sitting here with a warm jumper on, and I'm starting to roast a wee bit, especially sitting in front of the
Okay.
computer.
Yeah. All right. Well, make yourself comfortable. Meanwhile, I can talk about another thing that is coming to mind that I can't remember what the exact segue was that I was thinking of, but in the past month or so of me sitting here thinking about the last topic that we did, I was reminded of I've been told this is to speak to the immediate context we were talking in. I've been told that this is something that this is not in my direct experience. This is something where you have to work at a Japanese company to have this sort of aspect of cultural knowledge. And I happen to not have ever worked at a Japanese company. I worked for a board of education, and they had a whole like dedicated subsection of people who were all like there to support us to a greater or lesser degree. It sort of depended on the supervisor. But I've never actually worked in a Japanese company. And I've heard secondhand that sometimes people at a Japanese company, and I'm remembering the tie-in now, which is about sort of the circuitousness of the ways that Japanese people will or won't be rude or like attack you. And Chris Broad was mentioning like all the comments people would make about his being overweight at certain points in his life,
Mm-hmm.
and thinking, well, that's weird. Japanese people aren't supposed to be rude. What's up with this? And so that's the sort of tie-in for this story that I've heard, that sometimes people in Japan will have a foreigner in the office deliberately take the role of someone who can talk to a superior and tell that person that they have a bad idea, because that way they can blame the fact that a superior's shortcomings are being called out on the fact that this is a culturally insensitive foreigner.
Oh,
Sort of that power of obliviousness that I was mentioning last time.
wow, fascinating. Yeah, I remember we did get into quite a topic about that in terms of like the politeness or supposed politeness of
Mm-hmm.
Japanese culture. There's a video actually I've started following another ex jet program teacher on YouTube who does like little
Hmm.
shorts and stuff. And one of the things they came up with was another thing that would be very rude, at least in British culture. I assume in American culture the same. Not holding the door open, but according to them, apparently in Japan people don't hold doors open. But maybe that's only a Tokyo thing with a lot more people. Maybe in more rural areas they still do it. I don't know. What was your?
Well, in my experience, it's sort of like the difference between there's someone behind me, so I will keep this door open for them, and oh, I'm gonna step back and allow these people to go in before or after me, right? I think we
Mm,
have to sort of differentiate those two senses of
yes.
holding the door open. Because
Yeah.
I've definitely had Japanese people be like, "Oh, let me look and see if there's someone behind me. There is. I'm going to hold the door until they get there."
Yeah.
Right? Some people are too busy to be even bothered with that. But it's not uncommon for Japanese people, if you're right behind them, to continue in the communal act of keeping the door open to make it easy for you. But what I don't think you have in Japanese culture is, oh, like I'm going to go out of my way to hold the door open so that this other person can walk through ahead of me. They don't really
Mm.
do that.
I must admit, when I watched the video, I had the same inclination, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not the same thing. I would not hold a door, like, I would not physically just stand there, stop still, holding the door for everybody coming through the shop door, whatever it is. The only time I would do it like that very purposefully would be if I notice that the people coming in after me would have difficulty if they're older or if
Mm-hmm.
they're disabled or they've got young children or something. But if it's just a case of just you carry on your way, but you hold your arm back to hold the door for the next person to catch, and then
Mm-hmm.
that's fine. I don't think I'm not expecting anybody to just stand there and wait for 50 people to come through.
Right.
So I had the same gut reaction when I watched the video. I did. It's like, it, that's not quite the same thing, but yeah,
Right.
I found it interesting.
Yeah, and I don't
Nice.
I don't know what the video necessarily was, but yeah, I'm talking more like a scenario. So maybe not a whole crowd of people, right? If you imagine that there's not a whole bunch of people around and you arrive at a door and you open it and you look behind you and you see, oh, there's another family and they're sort of hurrying towards the entrance and they're just this lone isolated group of people. You might be like, okay, I'm just going to stand here with the door open and they can go in ahead of me and then I will walk in and there's no one else around and the door can now successfully close.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's sort of the polite scenario that I imagine happening like in the States.
Yeah.
Whereas in Japan, I feel like that never happens. You only get the everyone's going through this door, so we might as well keep it open sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. It seems like we had the same reaction to it then. Oh. It'd be interesting. I don't know if anybody would, but if there's anybody who is watching, or maybe if anybody who's come across from your channel who've also been on the Jet program, if they've got any sort of additional comments to add based upon that, it'd be
Yeah, that could be interesting. That could be like, because it could also be a regional thing for sure. Like you were mentioning, it might be a Tokyo only thing. I haven't spent the most amount of time in Tokyo, so that might be influencing my take.
mhm. Same with the comments too, and all and like just all that sort of stuff. Yeah. Well, we'll have to see.
Mm-hmm.
Um. Well, I think the thing I've circled first that we can go on to, we're back to the topic of drinking.
Ooh.
But not just drinking. There's a thing, again, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. There is a thing that the translation that Chris came up with was the Forgetting the Year Party.
Oh yeah, the
Bonen,
Bonenkai. Right.
Bonenkai, good. Okay, right.
Yep.
So the thing in particular, so I mean, we talked about, I can't remember if we did that off camera or on camera. We talked about attending parties and like the stages of the party and stuff.
Oh yeah, that was
Um,
definitely on camera. The different rungs of the ladder. Yeah.
right. Did you attend Bonenkai when you were in Japan?
I again, yeah, like the Bonenkai that I attend, it's like the Board of Ed Bonenkai. So
Hmm.
right off the bat, it's less intense than a private company's Bonenkai.
Right, I can
And
imagine.
again, I always get off at the first rung of the ladder. This is not my area
Yeah,
of expertise when it comes to Japan. So I have some experience with Bonenkai. It's like, okay, this is one of the parties that you have to go to, right? It's
right. Hmm.
and I get very annoyed. But
So
like, okay, it's one of the parties I have to go to. You got to forget the year. Yay.
I find it really funny that you call it the Forgetting the Year Party.
Yeah, well,
I
that's
love
literally what
that.
it translates to. Yeah, it's a fun idea.
Yeah. So I
I
mean,
agree.
Chris talked about a similar thing, right? The rungs, right? And as the night progressed, more and more of his colleagues disappeared into the night
Hmm.
until the hardcore were left behind. But the
That's
thing
right.
I'm gonna read a little quote, and this is a direct. This is not me paraphrasing. This is a direct quote from him about his sort of his summary of
Okay.
the initial rung of the party ladder, the Bonenkai.
Hmm.
He says that it turned stern and rigid colleagues into pantomime characters and then the second part, and then back to normal on Monday.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's very real. That doesn't just happen at Bonenkai. That's pretty normal for a Japanese enkai. That's why I think drinking is such a big part of Japanese culture, is because it allows everyone an excuse to get to act outside the regular social order, right? To act outside the very strict, like this is where what your role is. You always have to be very mindful of what everyone else's role is, right? And you have to be constantly thinking about all these things, and you can't have this free flowing exchange of ideas because you're in a hierarchy, and that has to be respected. And at a Bonenkai in particular, I guess. But again, this is sort of my experience of every sort of party is like it was a way to get around that, to be like, okay, we don't have to be so rigidly hierarchical, we can let our hair down a bit and have a good time and talk to people face to face like actual people. And I mean, he's talking about like I forget the exact word, but like stereotypes or something like that. um
Yeah, stern and rigid colleagues turned into pantomime characters.
yeah, pantomime characters, right? So yeah, and I think there's also something to be said for the fact that, to a certain extent, I don't think entirely, but to a certain extent, right? Even when you start going drinking, right? There's certain like social roles that you can feel more comfortable in that you will start to fulfill. So I think that can sort of speak to that. But yeah, that coincides with my experience, especially like I said, because I only go to that first rung on the ladder, but I still
Sure.
would observe that. Yeah.
That's interesting because the way he was talking about it was he the part of the book, especially the initial part of the book when he joins the school and everything. It's not just he's not just talking about his own experiences of being in Japan for the first time and all the new things. It's you've got all these characters which are his colleagues, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you get to know them really quickly. The ones who really take a liking to him and try to speak English with him and help him out and all this sort of thing. But then you've got the other half of the colleagues who are uh, do not communicate with him at all, are very standoffish,
Mm-hmm.
all this sort of thing. And then suddenly he was shocked when he went to this Bonenkai that suddenly, one in particular, and I can't remember the name, and I can't remember exactly if it was an English teacher or somebody else, but it was just the most serious person who hasn't spoken to him for the entire term or the entire year, depending on the timing of everything, suddenly opened up completely.
Mm-hmm.
And and there's also I think I've rung as well that you can't pour your own drink at these
Oh
things.
yeah.
You have to pour each other's, right. So they were pouring him drink, he was pouring that, and
Yep.
Chris left. I don't know at what stage of what rung he got to on the party ladder before he called it a night. But he went home thinking that he suddenly now bonded with all of
Oh
his
yeah.
colleagues, and then
Yeah.
that he's now fully integrated. And then on Monday, no, back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna this teacher's gonna ignore him for the rest of the school year.
Yep. Yep,
uh,
absolutely. I didn't really have this like an equivalent experience. I observed the same phenomenon, but I didn't have the equivalent experience of, oh, this person and I have really bonded and all of a sudden they feel cold again. Um, but to sort of draw on the closest parallel that I can think of, one of the very first parties that I went to um, with a bunch of Japanese teachers, these two guys decided to introduce themselves to me as famous figures of Japanese history.
okay.
And it's just like, yeah, so I'm Oda Nobunaga, and this is my friend Toyotomi Hideyoshi. And these are two of like the most famous people in Japanese history.
Hmm.
And, and so they were looking to have fun and play around with the foreigner and throw me for a loop. And I played along. So I was just like, oh, okay. I knew Japanese history. I'd studied it for,
Hmm.
years in college, but I was like, yeah, I can have fun, right? And so I sort of played along and was like, oh, that's an unusual name. You don't hear that sort of thing very often these days. And we then like went on to sort of bond and a little bit, and like there was one point where like one of them stood up and was like, hey, this new teacher's a good guy, and it was like, oh, that's nice.
Oh.
And then I never talked to them again.
Oh no.
That was like the one time I ever talked to them. And that
Oh,
year, actually, that was the year that they had a Bonenkai that I couldn't make because I always go back to the States to celebrate Christmas and New Year's.
right.
And usually the Bonenkai happens early enough that it's before that sort of break, but not always. And that was one of the years where it was like, okay, I'm not even going to be at the Bonenkai. And so they were like, oh, but we're going to miss you. And everyone's supposed to submit these questions for the Bonenkai. So why don't you at least submit the questions? And so I was like, okay. And I submitted the question. So like reincarnated Oda Nobunaga, how do you find modern Japan, right? That was the
Nice.
question I submitted. And so when I came back from my holiday in the States and was reconnecting with the teachers, I got a couple people be like, "We loved your questions at the Bonenkai,"
Oh, that's awesome.
which was fun. But again, like I never really connected or talked to those people again because it was just in the context of the party. But for me, in my personal experience, that's how I expect relationships to work. that's
That's
that's normal. That's 100% normal to me. This is kind of what I was sort of, I guess, an example of something I've alluded to before, which is that Japan in general seems to work in a way that like coincides with the way that I think some of the time.
hmm.
This is one of those ways where it's just like, yeah, we were having fun at that little party, but yeah, I don't really know them. They don't really know me. I feel like we should just like stick to our own spaces at work, and that'll be that. And I was totally fine with that. I wasn't looking for more. I wasn't like misled or like anything like
Okay.
that.
It,
Yeah,
it, it, it went along with your expectation of what you wanted from that. So that's,
yeah,
like Chris Broad, who was just very confused about what happened on
right,
Monday morning when all these teachers started ignoring him.
right. No, for me, I was just like, yeah, this makes sense.
Uh, see,
This is about what I expected. Yeah.
I'm like in a halfway house. I think at heart I'm an introvert, but I'd love to be an extrovert. But
Mm,
at times, depending, like in certain social situations when people are like not forced to be with me, that sounds really bad. But when you got a social situation that brings people together, it's
mm-hmm,
great. But the question is then when you suddenly meet them outside of that social setting, is it going to be natural? That's the problem.
mm-hmm.
I'm
Yep.
not very.
I
I'm
think
not.
I may
I'm
have
not.
actually.
Oh, you go.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say spontaneous initiation of conversation and stuff. I'm terrible at that. Just yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it has to be through some sort of social setting or some sort of. I want to talk to you for this very specific purpose. Not just like,
Yep.
hey, let's get to know each other. Just
Yeah, I can't do that either.
can't do that. I'd love
Yeah.
to, but I can't.
I'm pretty happy to be introverted personally. But yeah, I think I may have done that to a Japanese person because it wasn't like I met this guy at a public bath in a hotel. Sounds weird to call it a public bath in the hotel, but it's a situation where like it's so like hot springs or
Mm.
public baths they are a thing in Japan, right? And so I met this one guy in the bath at the hotel, and whenever I go into one of those baths, I have to take my glasses off. And I guess viewers may not know I wear glasses, and I rely on them to see with any ability. And so whenever I'm in a public bath, I can't see anything. I have to be very careful about when I go because you have to use the right like soap and shampoo and everything before you get into the
Mm.
actual large communal bath. I have to like get down to within an inch of whatever it is and be like, what am I using here?
Oh
um,
dear.
so I had this very nice conversation at a public bath in this hotel with this guy who I could not see or make out his facial features at all. And the next day, there was this Japanese guy as I was walking out of the hotel to like get on a bus to go to the next part of my tour because this was back is when I was living in Japan. It was back when I was back on a visit,
Mhm.
and so I was like getting on the bus to go to the next stop of my like travel destination, and this one guy called out and was just like, "Hey there!" And I was like, "Hi," and he seemed sort of like stricken. I don't know. He seemed taken aback at the like
Oh.
lack of response from me, and I was just like, okay, well, this is awkward, and I got on the bus, and that was it. But yeah, looking back, I was just like, yeah, that was probably the guy in the bath, and he probably thought it was super weird that we had a great conversation last night, and now I just have no response for him.
Wow. Poor guy, you might have traumatized him. He's probably still like holding his. Dad, I was having a really nice conversation with this foreigner, but he just pied me the next day.
That's right.
Poor guy. Oh dear. I think Spanish people, from at least, I mean, my limited experience of speaking with certain Spanish people, um, I feel it's the opposite.
Hmm.
They call somebody their friend when I probably bet they don't know them very well.
Mm.
Spanish people are extremely open. I mean, again, stereotyping, but in general, Spanish people are a lot more open. They're very sociable. I've talked about it before. A lot of them are very touchy feely, um,
Hmm.
which I'm starting to adapt to. A lot depends on who it is. Um, but
Yep.
yeah, but a lot of the time, especially like I found a lot with my father-in-law saying he calls everybody amigo, and I do want to
Oh
like.
wow.
I mean, not that I'm doubting his ability to socialize or try to disparage him in any way, but I do wonder, is like, what's the classification for amigo here?
Hmm.
You seem like you have a lot of friends.
Hmm.
Whereas for me, there's a certain threshold you have to reach to be a friend, rather than
Oh
just
yeah.
somebody I know. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Same here.
I don't know. It's a tough one. Oh dear. So
It
yeah,
is.
I the story of the Bodankai had me laughing a lot in terms of just the way it just transpired. I just found it very entertaining to listen or to read rather because I was reading it. Um,
Yeah, I could tell for the juxtaposition just of those sentences, right? That he was really emphasizing that flip. That's
yeah.
very good.
So that's the Bonenkai.
Hmm.
What other things? Oh well, a very small thing. Japan. Completely different topic. We're not talking about drinking anymore. Japan. They drive on the left-hand side of the road.
They do.
So how was that as somebody? Obviously, as a Brit, Chris had no issue with it because it's like
Hmm.
home away from home. But how did you find it? It must have been a bit. Was it a bit
That
weird?
was that was one of the things that I would point to as a moment of culture shock for me
Mm,
because I knew before I went to Japan that they drove on the left-hand side of the road. And then I went to Japan and I stepped out of the like airport to get on a bus and everything was going the wrong way, right? Like the cars were all moving wrong. I was naturally looking the wrong way to see oncoming traffic before I crossed the street
mm,
because I didn't realize how ingrained a habit it had become for me to look right and then left when
right.
actually I needed to look left and then right. And I'd get on a bus and we'd drive the wrong side of the street the entire way to our destination. And it was one thing to know it intellectually and another thing to like experience the disconnect between what I was used to and the way they did things in Japan.
Right.
So that's one of the things that like I mentioned before, like initially there was a lot about Japan that I just sort of took in and I didn't experience a huge amount of culture shock and I mostly felt the reverse culture shock when I came back home after having lived in Japan for a while.
Mm,
And but that was one of the exceptions where it's like, oh, it's so weird to have everyone driving on the other side of the road. And I didn't even drive in Japan. I
right.
never like I got an international driver's license, but I never drove. So I never really had to take the full brunt of it and like be like, oh, everything in the car is also the other way around, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, One of the most common things that you would do because one time actually my dad came to visit me and he decided he wanted to. I was like, we don't need to drive. He was like, no, I want to rent a car. So he decided he wanted to like he had an international license and he wanted to have the experience of driving through Japan and like he did something that I have since found out is very common among people who are like learning to drive in Japan, which is they go to turn on their turn signal and their wipers go up because even the stalks that stick out the side of the steering wheel are reversed.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
I hadn't even thought
So
about that. Interesting.
yeah. So it was wild. But so even without having driven, like that was something that I was like, whoa, this is different.
I can imagine. Yeah. I think from a British perspective, I think it's funny. My wife had the exact same thing when she landed in Edinburgh for the first time, even though she'd been to London and she'd been to
Mm-hmm.
Dublin and all these various places, right? And she was cultured. She knew that Britain on the drove on the other side, or drives still on the other side of the road. There's still that shock, right? When you get into a taxi, then you suddenly realize, why have I got the steering wheel on my side? Oh wait, I've got
Mm-hmm.
to get on the other side. Um, I think maybe for me as a Brit, it's easier to flip the other way because Britain is such the anomaly in Europe.
Mm.
Britain and Ireland is the anomaly in Europe, so anytime I've ever had to go anywhere outside the UK, immediately my
Mm-hmm.
brain goes, it's on the other side of the road. That it's automatically there. Um, so I've never done it where I've got onto the wrong side of a taxi or the wrong side of a bus or something like that. What
Mm-hmm.
I have had to deal with, as I've learned to drive in Spain, um, and I never learned to drive in the UK, so that was good. I was able to learn from scratch on the other side, the right hand side of the road, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously with the steering wheel on the left and everything. Time I've now kind of realized it. I still have the habit of looking the wrong way at junctions. Obviously, you have
Mm.
to look both ways, but I look the wrong way first. Now, obviously, if I when
Yep.
I'm walking, I do it, but walking's fine because walking speed is so much slower.
Mm.
I've got enough time to look. Even if I look the wrong way first, I'm still able to have enough time to look the other way and then make a really informed decision based upon that. When you're driving, especially if you come out to a give way, if it's a stop, that's different because you can just stop, get into gear, and you've got plenty of time to look. If it's a give way and you might have to go and take
Mm-hmm.
advantage, I've had it where I've looked the wrong way, and my instructor went, "You looked the wrong way," and I think it's kind of clicked in my brain now. It's because I'm still kind of thinking about it from the British perspective that I'm expecting cars to
Mm-hmm.
come from a certain direction on my side first. So it's something we have to try and fix over time.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
I definitely had to fight that same habit, that same like reflex.
hmm So fortunately, not as a passenger, but as a driver, I've had it.
Yeah.
So yeah, just interesting. I know it's tough when the majority of the world does it one way. It
Mm-hmm.
must be quite a shock when you go to the few exception countries. So there you go. So I just had that wee footnote. Another thing about
Mm-hmm.
driving, again,
Mm-hmm.
pronunciation. I don't want to pronounce this. I'm going to type it to you. There's too many vowels.
Okay.
I don't know where the intonation and pronunciation goes.
Fair enough. Daiko. Yes.
Daiko, right? Do you want
I
to
think
explain to the
I
people
think
what this is?
think I may have talked about this before because I explained this to my friend in Tokyo and he didn't think it was real.
I think it did come up in a podcast, and I think this might be one of the things when I was reading the book. It
Mm-hmm.
either reminded me of our conversation, or it was something I thought, I need to ask a Rook about this, and then afterwards I sort of realized you'd spoken about it. But do you want to very quickly recap what this is? I think it's very cool.
Yeah, so Daiko sort of means like representative. And the idea is that if you've been out drinking for a long time, then you don't want to drive. So you can call a specialized taxi service called a Daiko, and they will act as your representative. They will take your place, right? So Daiko, you're like replacing something you're acting in the stead of. This person will act in the stead of you as a driver at the same time as they also come pick you up in a taxi. So the taxi arrives, there's two people in, one person gets out, you give them your keys, they drive your car to where you specify while you're being driven with the other person in the taxi back home, basically.
hmm Yeah. So this was something that Chris experienced once he went out with one of his teaching colleagues, and they got very drunk. And yeah, the Daiku service turned up, and obviously cue Chris's drunken confusion about
Mm-hmm.
who's this other guy, why is he taking his car, and where's he going, and obviously then the British reaction from either him or me or both of us, I can't remember, would be, oh, if that existed in the UK, that'd be ripe for exploitation.
Yeah, which is
All
why
half the
my
cars
friend,
across England get stolen.
yeah, which is why my friend in Tokyo didn't believe me when I told him about it.
Mhm,
I was like, no, we have this service because another friend was visiting us both, and we were both because we're all friends. We are going around together, and he was like, "What happens like if you go to these all night parties and everyone's drinking all the time? How do they avoid drunk driving?" And I was like, "Well, they have this service." And my other friend from Tokyo was like, "Are you nuts? That that They never get the cars back. And I was like, oh, I guess they don't have those in Tokyo.
No, I guess not.
I think the trains run late enough and slash
Right.
start early enough in the big city that they don't have to uh, rely on Daiko services. But
I assume not.
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely in Hachinohe, that was a real thing. And it sounds like in this other part of Tohoku, I forget exactly where you said Yamagata. I forget what
Oh,
prefecture it was.
I wrote down Tohoku. I don't have the name of the place written down on my piece of paper. If I search on Wikipedia, I'd
Might
find
have
it.
been Niigata. Niigata is a huge portion of
Mm.
of Tohoku. Um, sorry, Chris Broad.
But yeah, but they've got it. They've got it there.
Yeah,
Uh,
this is one of the things that I'll probably when I'm listening back to it leave a comment and be like, it was this place because we specified it in our last episode.
I'm now looking it up. Uh, Sakata Yamagata. There you go.
It was Yamagata. I can't believe I got that right the
Nice.
first time.
Good
Amazing.
stuff. So
I
there you
didn't
go.
remember Sakata, but yeah, I was like, I'm not going to remember the city, but I'm impressed I got the prefecture. Cool. Also, one other thing, just on like taxis and driving services, you were mentioning before, and I think I've brought this up briefly on the podcast as well. But I just think it's cool that it's actually easier to not make a mistake about which side to get in a taxi in Japan because they have this thing where if a taxi pulls over for you, the driver can pull like a lever and it will automatically open the passenger door for you, so you can just step in. You don't actually have to open the door
Ah.
yourself.
Oh, neat. Okay. I
A
guess
lot
only.
of people get taken by surprise by that because they'll go to open the taxi door and they'll find it's already opening for them. They'll be like, "What?"
Hmm. I I guess the time where it would cause the most issue for somebody from Europe going to the UK would be if yeah, because we don't have those levers, but if the taxi driver gets out of the car to help with the luggage, and then the
Ah,
passengers
yeah.
have to make their own way to the doors, right, to get in,
Hmm.
they might go into the front. If there's especially if there's a lot of them and they all can't fit into the back, one might go into the
Hmm.
front and then go to the wrong side just out of habit.
Yeah. Yeah, and that would still happen in Japan too. It only works on the one like passenger side back door.
Yes, yeah. Oh, not the front door.
No, I don't. You generally don't get in the front of the taxi unless there's a lot of people.
Oh, when you say the back door, is it like one of the ones that is a sliding door?
No, it's not sliding. It's
Oh.
like a regular car door that opens on its own. It's pretty amazing.
Oh, that's cool. I've never seen that. I've seen the
Probably.
sliding ones which open automatically, and sometimes
Oh,
UK drivers will do that.
I haven't seen those, but no, it's like a
Come to
regular
Edinburgh.
car door, except there's like a yeah, except there's like a lever, and they can pull on this thing. So every time a taxi pulls over, it's like, and the like regular door behind the driver will just open up so that you can step in.
You can't come to Edinburgh or the UK, and you'll see the ones who have the automatic sliding doors for the back.
Well, it's got to happen eventually. I want to get there.
Yeah.
My immediate like tourism plans, I think I mentioned in the last podcast too, is to get back to Japan. But at some point, I want to
Rightly so.
go experience Scotland.
You can do it like a little bit of a detour, right? You can go back home via Scotland.
I
It's
don't
quite
think
a
that actually
detour.
makes sense. Yeah, it's just detour halfway around the world the other direction. Yeah,
Well, you'd have to, yeah.
I,
It's probably equidistant, no, more or less.
I don't know. Maybe it probably is pretty close. But what they do, like it depends which way you go. But they'll like they fly up over like the United States, and then they go up over Canada and up over
Yes, the North
the
Pole.
North
Yeah,
Pole, right?
yeah,
Because it's actually faster based on the curvature of the Earth to go up in that weird route.
yeah.
So I don't know exactly how it works out. I've done it where a lot of the times I've flown to Japan, I've flown Air Canada because I'm friends with someone who lives in Canada, and it's
Mm.
like, okay, I can do a short hop between the U.S. and Canada on the way back, and I don't mind doing the transfer on the way in. And that way, I can go to Japan for a couple weeks, stop by, see my friend in Canada for a little bit, and then head home.
Makes sense.
Yep.
That's a whole other topic. I used to. There's quite a lot of videos on YouTube from a, a channel called Wendover Productions who
Hmm.
back in the not recently but back in the day used to talk a lot about airplanes and stuff and talking about the development of airline travel in terms of planes being allowed to fly over oceans. And then also there was another one. I can't remember if he did it or it was another channel where they're talking about when the Soviet Union airspace was restricted, the
Mm.
routes that these planes had to take to try to
Mm.
get across sort of west to east, crossing over the Pacific Ocean and stuff from Europe off across to like Asia and things. And then it was what's the Anchorage in Alaska
Hmm.
became this really important connecting sort of hub.
Interesting.
Because a lot of planes had to refuel because obviously the back then technology wasn't as good. They had to all do a lot of
Hmm.
refueling and stopovers there. It's really interesting.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating.
Um, so that's cool. But if you ever make it over to this side of the pond, we'll have to
Hmm.
do an in-person podcast or something.
Ooh, that'd be fun.
We'll have to do a detour via Spain. But anyway, if I will see. I'll let you know if I ever get to the east coast of the states. I
Yeah,
think I
that,
think
that could be fun too.
if we're talking about likelihoods of which one will happen first, I think you making it to Europe might happen first.
Oh yeah,
but we'll
yeah, I think so too.
but we'll see.
We'll see.
Um, okay, so we done the Daiku. The sort of the incredulous reaction of Chris was very funny.
Hmm.
Okay, right. We're gonna have to talk about cats.
Ooh.
This is not about Japan, but for you personally, cat person, dog person. Here's the thing. All that stuff we did in the previous podcast with podcasts with politics and all the stuff about smoking stuff. That's not going to divide the room. Now we're going to divide the room. Dogs or cats, or
Yeah, here
both,
we go.
or neither.
Here we go. Yep.
Here's how we're going to lose half the audience, or most of them. We'll have to see.
Hmm.
What's your thoughts on it?
My thoughts are, I like all pets. Um, if you like force me to make a decision, I consider myself more of a dog person, but I like cats, and I don't own either one, so I don't
Look
own
at
any
you,
pets.
look at you, Mr. People Pleaser.
I'm just I'm like I just don't care that strongly.
Fair enough.
quite quite
I mean,
frankly,
I'm gonna say
just don't.
I think the same. To be honest, I
Yeah.
don't. If I had the choice, I'd rather have a cat. Just purely out of
Hmm.
practicality, that's less work.
Makes sense to
Um,
me.
but so if you anybody who tries to argue that dogs are more companionable than cats, then that's true. I mean, some cats can be, but yes, in general, yes, a dog is more companionable and you'd have more fun with a dog, and stuff. So understandable. But I like
Sort of
both.
depends on the cat and the dog,
Of course, yeah.
but yeah, because I
Uh,
yeah I've had some very companionable cats.
mhm. So that's good. Okay, we did split the room, unless there's some very strong opinions in the comments. We'll have to see.
Yeah, the
Um,
people who are very strict about one or the other will be upset.
Absolutely, but they'll have to tell us why now. They're gonna have to justify their answers to us.
That would be
Uh,
nice.
we'll have to see.
I don't think they. Those people, I don't think they would. That's a controversial statement.
People who have got strong opinions do not justify their opinions; they just say it.
They just say them, right?
So there was a theme developing. I think there was a particular um, it might be a particular chapter where it might be a video that Chris was working on,
Hmm.
where cats suddenly become this sort of prominent theme. Either that or just accumulation of lots of notes, and it was all just came about cats. Now I can't remember, but anyway. Um,
Hmm.
so one of the things he spoke about, which I thought was quite funny, there is the I've written down here Hachi, the Hachi lottery cat. There is a
Hmm.
cat in Japan that has the kanji or something similar to the kanji of the
Hmm.
number 8 on
Yeah.
its fur, and therefore because 8 is the lucky number.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. I don't know anything about this, but I've seen that before. Yeah.
Okay, 8 is the lucky number in Japan.
Right.
Okay, and the unlucky one.
It can be. Yes. There's Japanese. The Japanese numbering system is a little bit weird and very versatile, but
Oh,
yeah, eight is considered a one of the better numbers. Positive
okay.
associations for sure.
And do they still believe in 13 being the unlucky number like we do, or is it something different?
I no, not really. Four is a bad number in Japanese, and so is nine. Um,
Oh, really?
so
What's the
actually,
lucky number?
this this sort of ties in. It's all sort of based off of like readings and associations and things. So there's actually two different ways that you can pronounce the number for 4. One is yon, and that one's pretty neutral. I don't think people get fussed about that one. The other is she, and that is a cognate for the word. Well, cognate. I probably used that the wrong way. It sounds like the word for death. She. It's represented with a different
Oh.
character, but because the number 4 has the same reading as the character for death, there is an association. It's like, oh, that's bad. We don't like that. Um, Similarly, 9 is read as both ku and q, and ku is one of the readings for a character that means like suffering or agony. So, you know, death and pain being things that you can associate based off of the reading of a number, they have not so great associations with the numbers 4 or 9. And so you'll get things like, oh, the in Western like hotel buildings, sometimes they'll have floors. The floor numbers will go from like 12 to 14 to skip
Mm-hmm.
like the unlucky number of 13. In
Yeah.
Japan, you'll have floors go from number 3 to 5 to skip the unlucky like bad association number of 4.
Oh wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Or like the airplane rows, right? It skips row 13.
Right.
All right. And do they
Yeah.
have
Same.
an equivalent to Friday the 13th?
I don't think so.
Mm,
Yeah. If they do, I don't know about it. They have like
interesting.
they have like years of your life that are associated with being lucky or unlucky,
Oh,
called
well
yakudoshi.
that's great, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Poor
It's very
people who
fun.
say like Happy New Year. No, it's not.
Very fun to live through. Yeah.
This is going to be a very bad year for me. Oh dear. Wow. So there's a whole sort of next level sort of superstition then.
So yakudoshi, which is the term for the like unlucky year, I've just looked it up in my dictionary, which is telling me that it is especially ages 25 and 42 for men and 19 and 33 for women. Those are considered to be unlucky years. It has its origins in onmyodo, which is sort of I don't know exactly how to put it. It's like a native Japanese version. Like it's based off the characters for like the yin yang, but it's not like the yin yang is I might associate it from China. It's its own separate tradition. I'm not like super steeped in that particular aspect of Japanese culture, unfortunately.
I
But
see.
I would guess that those are probably more number based puns, just because number based puns are super common in Japanese,
Mm, based upon pronunciation stuff.
based
Interesting.
upon pronunciations. Exactly.
Right. Whereas, I mean, you can do puns with the English numbers, but not nothing that is going to be superstitious in any sort of way, or it's all very innocent, like 4 and 2. Right? They're all very innocent sort
Mm-hmm.
of things. There's nothing
Yeah,
related to
but
death
it's
or
like
suffering and all that
because
sort
of
of stuff.
the alternative ways that you can read different numbers, and some numbers have like multiple different ways that you can read them beyond just the super common. So I think most people who've studied a good amount about Japan will have heard about 4 and 9. Uh, but like depending on what you're counting, the way that you read certain numbers changes. So if you're talking about um, if you're talking about like one, I'm trying to think of like how to explain this, like give good examples for counters. um, but if you're talking about like sheets of paper, they're flat objects, and one of the counters that you can use for flat objects is mai. So you can say peiji ichimai for one page of paper. But um, if you're talking about like 1 month, the interval of 1 month, you would say ikkagetsu, and it's a different reading. And typically, the numbers 1 through 10 are the ones that change the most often. And depending on what counter you're pairing with what number, the reading will change completely. So it can be very confusing, right? You can know a lot of
That's
Japanese numbers and not necessarily know how to count things.
that sounds exceedingly complicated, by the way.
Oh, it's extremely. It is. It is very complicated and sort of annoying. And a lot of them, it's actually so complicated. A lot of them just aren't in use anymore. So, like for example, one of the ways that you count, like, if I remember correctly, is like courses in a meal. Is you use the character for chopsticks and you pronounce it as zen. So you have ichizen, nizen, sanzen, something like that. Um, but it's been a while since I've had to count, courses in a meal, so I could be misremembering that. I'll probably leave a comment with a correction if I just got that wrong. But the principle is definitely correct. Depending on what you're counting, you have to count the numbers differently.
That somewhat makes a mockery of my B2 level in Spanish. That's like I've gone through a fraction of the amount of work. Need to try and get my head around that system. Good grief.
Yeah,
That
it's
sounds
weird
very
because
convoluted.
The Japanese numbering system, like in general, is really really basic and easy to understand. If you can count from 1 to 10, you can count to 99
Hmm.
because they go like 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10, and then 10 1 10 2 10 3 10 4 10 5, all the way up to 210.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go 210 1, 210 2, 210 3, right? Niju ni, niju san, niju yon. You're just literally saying the number of tens and then the
Right.
single thing. So
Going
you can
through
go from
all
1 to
the
99.
yeah.
You
It's
can
the
go
same.
from 1 to 99, and then all you need is the number for 100, and you can go from 1 to 999.
Right. And then the same for 1,000. Then it just keeps repeating itself.
Except there's things get weird over 10,000 because 10,000 becomes its own unit for reasons that are historical that I don't fully understand, and it makes it very sort of weird. Um, 10,000 is Ichiman. There is one unit of 10,000. So throws a wrench in the works. But until you get to a very high number, right, the numbering system is incredibly logical. And so you learn that, right? In your like intro to Japanese courses, you learn that and you're like, or I don't know if the listeners do, but I did. And I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. This is so easy. So nice to be able to do, like, I can do math in Japanese and it's super easy. And then you learn the weird things about 10,000, and then you learn, even if you can do the like numbers in their abstract, when you actually apply them to things, the reading changes, and you have to know all these different readings and all these different exceptions to these rules. And it's just it's one thing piles onto another.
Oof. Yeah. I was in a bookshop today and I did see a learn Japanese book about. Oh, I wonder how difficult that would be. Yet no. I'll
Yeah,
leave it to you. If I have any
yeah.
Japanese questions, I'll punt them your way. I'm not
It's
gonna.
even
I'm
like if you're
not gonna get
talking like the
involved.
first, second, third of the month, it's not like Ichi Nichi, which is what you would expect it would be. It's Suitachi, which doesn't come from, it's like its own, you just have to know that word. And then the second isn't Ninichi, it's Futsuka. And then the third isn't Sannichi, it's Mika. And then once you get like over 10, it starts becoming Juichi Nichi, Juni Nichi, Jusan Nichi. And then there's a throwback and you get Juyoka. And you're like, what's happening?
Yeah, I'm just gonna
So
stick to Spanish if you don't mind.
yeah,
I'm not going down that path. That sounds like a
Japanese,
rabbit hole. I do not want to enter under any
yeah, not
circumstances.
not necessarily for the faint of heart.
Goodness. I mean, I just realised I was something else. I'm gonna punt you a message.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. 4 plus 9 is 13.
Oh, Illuminati confirmed.
That's right. Become the numerology podcast with Scott Sword and Haruki Mania.
Absolutely. Sorted. We've fixed all problems now. Oh dear. That's awesome.
Shiku Ju-san.
How do we get onto that? Oh yeah, right. The cat with the kanji.
That's right. The
So it's
lucky
like the
number 8.
very lucky, and this cat is extremely lucky now. And I've also written down something which doesn't make sense to me. Maybe it's an expression. Is the English phrase like cats to a coin.
Hmm. I
But
don't know that one.
now I don't know what that means. That was one of my cryptic notes. I just wrote and went, I'm going to remember this. No, you're not, because this is 5 months down the line. I'm going to type into Google
Yeah.
and see if that helps me. Maybe
Hmm.
it's like the expression, like the. Is it the slogan for the lottery? Oh dear. That might just be something I have to throw into the void.
Hmm.
Oh, giving a coin to a cat. It's a Japanese proverb, which means we should not give such things to people who don't appreciate it.
Ah,
She's
okay.
using the words Nico and Koban. I
Hmm.
don't know. Oh, Nico
Yeah, I'm not
Nikoban.
familiar.
Hmm.
Well, Neko for cat, right?
Oh,
And then
Neko. Sorry.
yeah.
Ah, but is this coming? Oh, wait, hang a minute. Oh no, that's something different. Because obviously, then another thing that is like really common in Japan is the literal translation, the beckoning cat, like the cat statue with like
Yes.
the
Mm-hmm.
paw that moves up and down. Was it
Right.
Maniki Niko?
Maneki Neko. Yep.
Maniki Niko. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
That was a thing that came up as well. Um, there you go. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the lottery cat, the kanji on its thingy. There's also a thing that you talked about. I think a lot of countries will have this. Like, there's a famous cat man in Japan, a man who would go out. I can't remember what street or what town it was, but a man that would go out into the city with a like a baby buggy, like a stroller, I guess you would call it,
Hmm.
filled with 9 cats. and, he,
Interesting.
and he became a bit of a celebrity. And I just wrote
Hmm.
down as a random comment, I saw somebody walking a cat on a lead the other day.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've seen those. I've
uh,
seen like cat leashes. I've seen those.
um,
Was it like a harness type or like something that went to a collar?
uh, I think it was more of a harness. I can't imagine
Okay.
cats would like collars very much.
Right. That's what I that's what I was thinking. Most of the people I've seen, because I've also seen that. I've seen people walk their cats on leads or leashes, as I would call them.
Mm,
Um, and the only time I've ever seen that, they've been on in harnesses.
mm. I mean, cats can wear collars, but I can't imagine them having a collar that you're then there's like a lead then running from it, and you're
Yeah,
potentially
you can
tugging on
actually
it.
yeah, that you can actually get to your cat if they have the collar on to attach the yeah.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, some dogs hate I can't imagine some cats are very placid and just let you do whatever you want to them, but most cats, then surely a harness is harder to fit, but then it's probably more comfortable to wear. I don't know.
Yeah, I know that so my brother owns some dogs and they have harnesses and I think the idea is it better distributes where when you pull on it, it distributes where the like force is going. So it doesn't all pull around the neck.
Right.
You get the whole body and it's more comfortable and better for the animals is I think the idea.
Which I think makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, I guess it depends.
Yeah,
Again,
apparently
depends on the
the
dog. If the
Koban.
dog behaves well, you'd have to pull on the collar much anyway. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, that's the ideal.
mhm,
Is loose leash.
exactly.
But I feel like few people ever reach the ideal. I've just looked up the proverb myself. Apparently, the koban is a gold coin from the Edo period, which is why I'd never heard of it. But yeah, I was hoping. I am learning things from this podcast. This is nice.
Oh,
Neko ni koban.
I've found also this is very fascinating for the people at home. I've also found the like a picture of the lottery cat. I'm going to quickly punt it to you, just for not that we
Mm,
have to talk about it more anymore now necessarily, but just for future reference in case you want to read about it. There you go.
nice.
There he is. Oh, she. I
Oh
don't know if
yeah.
it's a he or she, so I'll just say
Yeah, I can't
it.
tell. Yeah, Hashi the lottery cat. Interesting.
Does how she sound like a male or female name?
I could not tell you.
Oh, fair enough.
I'm very bad at knowing that sort of thing, especially because it's a number, right? It's very clearly a play on the number 8.
Mm,
So,
okay. It's not like
yeah.
it's the same in Spanish.
If it ended in ko,
Oh,
if it
right,
was
then you know.
Hachiko,
Right.
yeah, that's more likely to be a girl. But Hachiko sounds very much like Hachiko, right? The famous loyal dog of Japan.
Oh, okay. I don't know about this.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a story I was recently listening to, the History of Japan podcast, go figure, coming up again on the show. He
Mm.
did a whole episode dedicated to portrayals of dogs in Japan and how it was fascinating how they were like tied in with people's idea of like races. So like they were like, okay, like there are races of animals, there are races of humans, and we can sort of draw these like parallels between the dogs that the people of this human race keep and the dogs of this other human race keep. and we can talk about how we're superior, right? It's all this outdated thinking from the 19th century, and just the way that people would use these things. And he did this whole in-depth thing about how the story of Hachiko, which I've heard just divorced from all context as the story of a very loyal dog, was actually like pushed as a narrative specifically by the people in Japan who like really wanted to emphasize the trait of loyalty as like a unique Japanese race trait, and how that's how they're superior to people in the West.
Oh wow.
Um, you can see some of the influence of like World War II.
Mm-hmm,
Because if I
mm-hmm.
remember correctly, the original story is of so it's this Japanese professor who would commute every day to and from his work at a university in, I think it was in Tokyo. It has to be in Tokyo because that's where the statue is. They made there's a very famous statue of this dog Hachiko, where people, they now use it as like a popular meeting spot where they'll be like, hey, well, let's go meet at the Hachiko statue outside Shinjuku Station. So Shinjuku Station was where this guy would like commute, this Japanese professor commute to and from work back in like the early lead up before World War II Japan, if I remember the time period correctly. I might be getting the time period wrong.
I'm looking at my
Um,
Wikipedia. The dog died in 1935. So
so there you
in terms
go.
of
Yeah.
using it for Second World War, sort of, propaganda and stuff would definitely fit with that timeline.
Yes, it does. Okay. So yeah, the story is it's very simple at its heart, which is that the dog would always go meet its master, and one day at the train station, and one day his master tragically passed away, and the dog continued to go back to wait for him at that train station every day for like years on end. And the guy's neighbors like ended up helping to sort of take care of the dog, and it's this very heartwarming and also sad story of this loyal dog who was continuing to wait for his master to come home, just sort of hoping against hope, I guess, is the idea. And they made a statue of the dog and put it in front of the station. Like I said, it's where a lot of people meet up nowadays. So there's probably better tellings of that story than what I just gave,
Mm-hmm.
but that's the basic version of it.
That's a good summary. The only thing I'm seeing here is from the not that I knew about it, but I'm just looking it up. The only detail I'd added was over 9 years the dog waited.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so hearing that and reading it, that is almost like the Japanese equivalent of Greyfriars Bobby in Edinburgh, um,
Hmm.
which is an older
I don't know about
story.
this one.
This is from
Yeah.
the about 1850. Well, the dog was from 1855 to 1872, so 19th century. Who also has a statue. So I think in that case, I think it wasn't the dog waiting. I think the owner, the master died, but the dog persisted in guarding the grave of the
Mm-hmm.
owner for I don't know how many years. It doesn't say. But
Hmm.
now the dog was called Bobby, but Greyfriars is the area of Edinburgh, and there's a kirk, a church there, which is
Mm-hmm.
Greyfriars, and there's a cemetery there. And outside the cemetery, in the street, there is a really nice. I'm gonna punt the image to you. And I can, if I remember, I can put it into the comments below for people to check out. Of this is it a terrier? Yeah, Sky Terrier dog.
Yeah, it looks like a terrier. I just got the image.
And it's a tradition that everyone goes and touches his nose, but you shouldn't do that because then they go and have to repaint it all the time. The idea is not for his nose to be touched.
I see.
It starts wearing away, and you see the gold, like all the
Yeah,
metallic
yeah. It was when
wearing
you
through.
said it because I'm looking at this picture and you said everyone goes and touches its nose and I was like, well, why doesn't it turn gold?
Because
And you were like, oh, you're not supposed to do it. They repaint it.
yeah, they repaint it every single time. There's also another statue in Edinburgh of David Hume, who I think, if I remember right, was a philosopher.
Yes,
Um,
very very famous in the history of philosophy.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. I only know him as somebody in Edinburgh, not as a of his actual work.
Mm-hmm.
But again, there's a statue. There's a tradition that you touch his foot if you're going to do your final exams in the superstition that they'll help you pass your exams. And his foot, you can see, is of a very different shade compared to the rest of the statue, just
Yeah,
because of
I
people
think it's cool when that
continuously touching
happens.
it. Yeah, it is a very
Yeah,
cool effect. It's so distinct. But yeah,
yeah.
poor Bobby. And every time I walk past Bobby, I just see a horde of tourists around it. Touch him, like, don't touch his nose, telling off
That's
these
funny.
poor tourists who don't know any better.
Well,
Um,
now I know not to touch the nose.
you can go and admire him, and he's there. He's always going to be standing there, outside the pub, and the cemetery. But yeah, don't
Yeah,
touch his
until I
nose.
saw the picture, I was gonna say that sounds like the Great Wolf Sif from Dark Souls.
There
But Sif is a little bit different looking than a terrier.
you go.
But
So that's
loyal dog, I feel like is a pretty common trope, as we've just sort of demonstrated.
yeah, of course. Yeah, it's man's best friend and all that.
Mm-hmm.
What was the other? Oh yeah, so this is a thing that Chris ended up having to doing as a video documentary. It might have been before he had his channel, but there was a point in the book where he was describing trying to get his work, and he managed to make a contact to try and make documentaries together. And one of the ones he had to do, I can't remember if it was for this or this third party or for his own channel, but was for a cat, Tama the station master. There was
Ooh.
a particular station where I think the line was due to get closed down, but they
Mm-hmm.
managed to convince the authorities to keep it open. But they had, um, I think it was an orphaned cat got adopted by the train
Hmm.
station staff, and the popularity of the cat was such that people would come just to visit her. She had the official post as station master in the
Oh,
station,
nice.
and saved the station. Um, and then
Wow.
since then, there have been other cats who have become workers in the station, and there's even a train that has been painted. The livery of the train
Mm-hmm.
has her image all over it.
Oh, that's cool.
I thought it was really neat.
Yeah,
Um,
that's great. I love when they theme trains. Like you just reminded me of this one like brief moment that I happened to catch where they I was on a bullet train, Shinkansen, and I was looking over and they had another Shinkansen on like the opposite track. And that one was all done up with the image of a Pokemon.
oh,
And so
neat.
there was like just all sorts of these famous Pokemon, like all along the outside of the Shinkansen. And I happened to be sitting across from this little Japanese kid who was probably like 5 years old.
Oh,
And he was having the time of his life. His mind, you could tell, his mind was blown by the fact that
oh,
there were Pokemon all over the Shinkansen. And then it started to like pull out of the station before we did. And I just heard this kid be like, Pokemon Shinkansen ikanaide, which is just like,
oh,
no, don't leave Pokemon Shinkansen. It was so cute.
oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah, so I love it when they do things like that to like give little themes and like make the trains fun like that. It's very
Hmm.
cool.
I agree. I agree. I mean, in the UK, there's not so many of them. A lot of the trains, especially back in the old days with the steam locomotives, we talked about mallard, right? Which is
Yes.
a type of duck, which is a bit of a weird name, but I think it's the designer Nigel Gresley was a really big fan of birds. There's actually a collection of a lot of them were named after different birds, and then
Hmm.
some of them got renamed as other things later.
Oh,
Um, so a lot of the locomotives got named, but not so much now. A lot of them were named after people, not after
I see.
things necessarily. But yeah, a lot of them are not decorated, which is a bit of a shame. I did see one which was really nice, and it was by where were we? I think I was in Bristol or Bath, which is on the west side of England, on the western coast of England, and my wife and I waiting for a train, and one of the regional trains came past. But this was uh, still, I guess, technically inside pandemic time, but a lot of the restrictions had been lifted at this point, and the livery of the train had been changed to basically thank all the health workers of the National Health Service for their dedication during the pandemic.
Oh,
It was a
that's great.
really nice sort of mural that was on one of the carriages, and I thought it was really cool. I have an image of it somewhere, but I need to try and dig out and find it. Um, but a lot of the time they don't do that sort of thing. where they've got like the Pokemon livery, right, or
Mm-hmm.
the one that's dedicated to this. Is it? Would you just pronounce it as Tama? Would that be the way you'd pronounce it?
Yep.
This
Tama. Yep.
Tama. There you go. There she
Hmm.
is. I've sent a picture. I'll try and leave a link in the comments of her, with her
Yep.
with
She's got
her
her
with
own.
her badge and
Yep.
her hat and everything.
Yep.
Proud as
Station
punch.
master's cap. Yep.
Hmm. So it's a huge deal. And then she's since passed away, but they've had to get another one, which I think might be quite similar in appearance. So that her legacy is still living on, and it saved the station, and it's now this massive tourist attraction. So where is it? It is in Wakayama Prefecture,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Kinokawa.
Wakayama. Okay.
There you
Nice.
go. So the southern part, but yeah, I thought it was
Yep.
really neat.
Southern sort of on the coast of the inland sea. Yep.
Hmm. I thought that was really neat. I thought that was a really nice thing. It then reminded me of a British thing, which could have come up in the quiz that we did a few episodes ago, but we didn't.
Mm.
But maybe it's something that maybe in the States you might have heard of, but then again, depending on news or what sort of internet stuff you consume, maybe you don't know it. Do you know about Larry the cat?
I do not.
Okay, so Larry the cat is a cat in the UK who also has a job, an official
Ooh.
position, and because of that, somewhat celebrity status.
Hmm.
But Larry is not a station master cat. He is a government official.
Okay.
He is the official cat that lives in 10 Downing Street, which is the residence of the Prime Minister, our head of government.
Mm-hmm.
He is not the property of the prime minister. He's the property of the house. So he has been the pet, quote unquote, of several prime ministers now, especially since we've gone through quite a few of them in recent years with so many scandals and resignations and stuff. But he is very much the cat of the house, not of the prime minister. But he has an official title. He
Hmm.
has an official Wikipedia page with his official government portrait, like all the other politicians do, and he's got his Union Jack bow tie on because why not? His official
Oh yeah.
title is Chief Mouser to the Cabinet Office.
Ah.
His job is to rid Downing Street of any mice.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, he's not very good at it, but never mind. He is the chief mouser
Mm-hmm.
anyway. It's an official position. I think there've been other cats that have been chief mouser, um, but he has become quite a celebrity status. And often, when Downing Street, the official street where you've got the prime minister and also the chancellor of the exchequer, who's basically our finance secretary, live.
Mm-hmm.
That street used to be open. So back in the old days, my mum was brought up in London, and she told me that that street used to be open and you could walk down it. But obviously, with security and stuff in modern day, it's all blocked off. But the press can still go into Downing Street. So anytime there's a huge press conference and things, or an
Hmm.
announcement to the nation, you'll have the I can't remember what's called, the lectern, that the prime minister will walk out of Downing Street and to the lectern, give the speech, and then walk straight back in. But there'll be a bank of press in Downing Street. But a lot of the time, when they're waiting for an official announcement, or they're waiting for other politicians to turn up if there's any government changes and stuff, Larry will often come outside and becomes the center of attention, especially if he starts chasing after a pigeon or starts having a fight with another cat or something. He's become quite a celebrity figure. He's got his
Mm-hmm.
own Twitter account. It's parody, obviously. Normally, it's based on Larry saying that he could do a better job than
Oh,
all the
okay.
politicians. So it's clearly a parody. It's not run by the government, or it's not a government account. But yeah. If you ask most British people who they'd want to be in charge of the country, we'd probably say Larry. Would be very happy with that. So there you
Amazing.
go. Yeah, I can't remember now with the most recent prime minister who's come in, or if it's the one before. There is a cat. There is another cat. I think it might be the Starmer family. Keir Starmer is now our current prime minister. I think he has a cat. So there was all going to be this tension of, oh, is Larry? All the tabloids are going mental. Oh, is Larry going to get on with this new cat kind of thing? There's going to
Mm-hmm.
be like fighting over territory, just drama to try and get us through the day, right?
Yeah.
while ignoring all the other shit show that's going on in the country. We can just talk about Lowry and everything's better. So yeah. He has outlived 6 prime ministers. I mean, I say outlived. I mean in terms of tenure, not in terms of actual
Yeah.
life.
Right.
He's seen 6 of them come and, well, 5 of them come and go, and
Hmm.
one of them hasn't gone yet. So there you go. So I just saw that, and it was
Like,
just the 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 comparison between the two. I thought it was quite nice.
yeah, it's like don't get any funny ideas, Mister
Yeah,
New Guy.
exactly. He just it's a Keir Starmer's first day. Larry just comes up. Is like, I've got rid of 5 of you. Yeah, this is child's play to me by now.
That's right.
uh, yeah, there you go. So that's Larry the cat. If there's any we should probably have a Larry the cat segment on the podcast. If there's any updates about Larry the cat or anything in the news, I'll have to inform the viewers.
Sounds
Um,
good.
so that's all the cat talk. There was something else, but now looking at it, I don't think it was wine for wine for cats, which I thought was a bit weird. A combination
That
of
is
grape
weird.
juice and catnip. Uh,
Hmm.
Weird. I don't know how that came up in the book now, but never mind. That's fine. That's most of the
Well, it
cat
sounds
talk.
like sounds like Chris Broad had to do a lot of research about cats, which is how
Clearly,
you find out about that thing.
that
So
is
one
true.
thing I can share, like a lot of things that get a lot of like press outside of Japan are often things that Japanese people like aren't fully aware of themselves because they're just going about their daily lives like
Hmm.
doing ordinary things, and someone does something like at some far-flung part of the country, and people find out about it overseas, and they're like, oh, look how crazy Japan is, look at this thing that's happening, right? um, and I remember this happened, and I was surprised because I thought this phenomenon was bigger than it was. But when I was first going over to live in Japan, like one of the things that was making the rounds, I'm like, oh, look how weird Japan is, was cat cafes, where it's like,
Ah,
okay,
right. Hmm.
people don't have, giant apartments, right? Real estate's at a premium. They don't really own pets. Everybody in Japan, but like they still like pets. They like to interact with them. So why not have this space where the cafe owns the cats and they've got all the like space that they can play in, and you can go buy some food there, spend some time with the animals, get your like dose of cute pet socialization in, and then go home, and you don't have all the hassle of dealing with the cats. And people are like, "Oh, this is so like wild! What a crazy concept!" And there have since been like I know there's some cat cafes in my area now, so
Mm.
they've certainly spread. It's a concept that makes sense not just in Japan but around the world. But I remember specifically like talking with one of my supervisors at one point about another ALT who was going to plan a trip, and she really wanted to go see a cat cafe, and my supervisor was like, "A what?" He had like never heard of it. It was a brand new concept to him, and I was just like,
Wow.
yeah, not every Japanese person knows about these things because like you get so much exposure to it abroad. And I mean, it's been like I said, 10 years since I left the country. I'm pretty sure most people in Japan know about cat cafes these days. But back when
Mm.
they were still like an emerging phenomenon, it was still something that could very much fly under your average Japanese person's radar.
Right.
But it's like, hey, there's this funny thing they're doing in Tokyo. Let's talk all about it. And so it's like, of course, people in Japan know about cat cafes. And I had that moment where it was like, nope.
That's fascinating.
So
I mean,
yeah,
I have you been to one?
I don't think I have. I've been outside of one, but I think that I saw it when I was walking Japan, and I was exhausted and just wanted to go to my hotel. So I just kept
Priority at that
walking.
moment
I
was
took
not
a
to go and say hi to the cats.
right.
You had your own
I
needs
took
to be
a
dealing with. Yeah.
I took a photo instead and was like, I've seen one. I left. I
Because
have not had the cat cafe experience. Maybe I'll do that next time I go to Japan.
there's some that have opened up. I mean, the first time I ever heard of a cat cafe was actually in Edinburgh. I
Hmm.
think it's still there. There's one off Grassmarket. Um, and I was always a little bit sort of skeptical because you do wonder. I mean, in terms of how controlled is it? Are they actually looked after properly? All this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, but then I've actually been to one here. It was just
Hmm.
it was a very random. It was nothing that my I went with my wife. We didn't plan it in any sort of way. We were in a random town for the day, trying to sort of kill time because we had an appointment. But then once the appointment was done, we couldn't get back to our hometown very easily, and we're kind of just sort of stuck there killing time. And I think maybe the day of the week that we went, I think cafes were kind of shut at really weird times, or we didn't know where to go. And I just did a random
Hmm.
Google search, and I was like, "There's a cat cafe," and we'd been there before, but it opened up in the time in between our two visits there, so we didn't know about it.
Ah.
So we went along, and we had to go. I think we had to keep going back because they were saying, "Oh, we're full." So they do really sort of restrict the numbers of people who can go in, not to overwhelm
Hmm.
the space, but also the cats.
Hmm.
But after we went sort of back and forth a little bit, and they were like, "Yeah, you can come in," and it was actually a really nice experience. I think always be the way this is animals get involved. There'll always be people who will exploit and not
Hmm.
treat them well, but it seemed like they're all treated well. And the way it was done was that the cats are not permanent members; they are
Hmm.
in theory up for adoption. So it was a way of having almost like to try and facilitate like an adoption service for them, but then also allow people to come and interact with them, and also get maybe a way for people who maybe are thinking of getting a cat, they can at least meet them a
Hmm.
little bit and see if there's one that they get on quite well with. You
Hmm.
don't have to commit, and it's not like in a formal setting of a cat adoption agency. There we go. It's just a
Right.
nice sort of informal setting. And it was just really
Yeah,
nice.
I like that idea.
We were told like they were very strict. I mean, at least the one we went to, there were strict rules. You can play with them and you can cuddle them and stuff, but you can't pick them up.
Hmm.
You can't just go up to a cat and pick them up. They have to come to you.
Hmm.
So yeah, and they had a space away from the cafe, so we saw a lot of them go underneath a door and go off into the road sort of
Ah,
area where they can play and climb and stuff. But there's still quite a lot
nice.
coming round us, and there was one in particular that was just sort of lying in a beanbag, all very cozy. And I just went up to it and just gave it a little stroke, and then
Hmm.
I was sitting down next to it, and it just crawled onto my lap and just sat
Oh,
there for
nice.
20 minutes, just having a wee snooze on my lap and was just enjoying the cuddles I was giving it. Cats seem to like me. I've got a nice propensity for cats. I was one in particular. There was one in a family I visited in Germany once, and their cat
Hmm.
just came up to me and again did the same thing, just crawled into my lap. I was really
Oh,
enjoying like
nice.
the tickles I was giving it, and all the family were like, "He never does that."
Wow.
So I think cats seem to like me.
Nice.
So I've had quite good experiences with cats. And if they're a bit standoffish, I know some cats are not as friendly, and they're a bit standoffish. They don't like it when people come into their space, so I don't push it. Um, so I've never been clawed or anything, just because I've never. If I see a
Hmm.
cat is not happy with me, I don't push it.
Hmm.
But a lot of the time when I was walking back, I mean, I can't remember if I said this on the podcast or not, but when I used to walk home from university back to my flat, I used to take different routes just to make it to sort of break up the monotony of it. But one of the routes I used to take would go through a slightly sort of more upper class suburban little neighborhood in between the two main roads, and there were a lot of cats around there. Not strays, but they would belong to the houses. But they would just often sit on the garden or the front garden walls as I was walking
Hmm.
past. So obviously I'd go and say hello to them and give them a pet and whatever. And I just carry on my merry way. And I turn around behind
Hmm.
me, and this whole like half a dozen cats follow me up the hill. They want to come
Ah,
home with me. And I'm having to
ah,
shoo them back. Like, you can't come home with me as much as I want you to.
amazing.
I don't want to be responsible for suddenly, headlines in the newspaper the next day and all these cats are going missing across the city.
Oh, that's
um,
wild.
so yeah, in general I seem to get on with cats quite well. And we've got a couple that we play board games with who've got two
Ooh.
cats. One cat
Ah.
is very calm, is the most gentle, calm cat, will go and snooze and doesn't cause anyone. The other one is a terror. Absolute animal. He doesn't try to claw me in like an aggressive way, but he'll bring his claws out and try and grab my clothes or whatever. He had to
Oh.
try and pick. his claws out. He's not doing it to
Yeah.
hurt me. He's just being a bit of a
Right.
terror. And
Yep.
we're trying to
I've
play
experienced that behavior.
yeah, I try to play board games, and then he'll jump on the table, and you're like, "Get down!" And he was
Mm-hmm.
doing this over and over. And I was like, "Next time he does it, give him to me. I'll handle it." So the
Mm-hmm.
next time he hops up, I took him, and what I did was, as I was holding him, I took the box of the board game that we're playing in, flipped it upside down, put it on the ground, and put him beside it. 5 seconds later, he's inside the box and he's happy and he falls
Mm-hmm.
asleep inside the box.
Nice. Oh, that's great.
You just know what cats like. They want to get a
Yep.
box and just sit in it and they're fine.
Perfect
So
solution.
yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
When we
It seems to be.
used to, so I'm friends with some people, and we used to get together in person to play D&D. Most of the time these days we do it online. Since the pandemic, we've shifted, and then we haven't gone back because it's just more convenient. But we used to get together in person a lot to play games, and they had a black cat, and every now and then it would jump onto the table, and the joke was always, "Oh, it's the sudden appearance of the black dragon,"
Oh yeah.
because it would be like knocking around all the miniatures.
Oh, just wants to get involved. I always find it nice. I'm on the Facebook board game group page.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I post or anything, but just I like to see what people are posting because there are some like discussions about games, but a lot of the time it's videos, pictures of people playing board games. But a lot of the time the cats get involved. It's always nice when it's a
Mm-hmm.
cat themed game like I Love Cats or Calico or something. It's almost like
Mm-hmm.
they want to get involved and with the game as well. It's really nice. Cats are awesome. Can be absolute
Absolutely.
terrors.
Yes, they
Um,
can.
if you want to see a cat that's a terror, there's a good Instagram page. I think they might have renamed it, but I know it as the Golden Breakfast Club, and it's
Hmm.
uh yeah a golden brown cat called
Mm-hmm.
Waffles and a golden brown dog. I can't remember. Maybe it's a type of Labrador. I'm not exactly good with dog breeds. Called
Hmm.
Maple. The cat is an absolute grumpy bastard. It is just the
Mm-hmm.
grumpiest cat. Gets angry at everything. Hates the dog. Hates the. He loves the mum,
Mm-hmm.
but the I think it must be the husband of the couple
Mm-hmm.
is referred to as the spare human for occupying the space. And sometimes Waffles is happy, but a lot of the time gets
Mm-hmm.
annoyed at everybody else's behavior. And his most
Oh, that's
toxic
funny.
trait is picking the most inappropriate spot to sleep or try to sit in, which will often be like the spare's lap or on top of the sofa, and then will
Mm-hmm.
complain at everybody else for not giving him that space,
Mm-hmm.
even though he invaded the space. So it's constantly popping up on my YouTube and Instagram, and I do like it. It always brightens up my day. It's very funny.
Nice.
Um, so that's the cat talk. The other stuff I got is kind of potentially quick fire, but maybe not. The other thing I found was quite funny. Chris at some point had to go to the GP, to the
Okay.
doctors, um, and there's a couple of things he found uh, quite a huge culture shock. There was
Hmm.
firstly he was for a very innocuous, basic problem. He was put on an IV drip.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
He said it was apparently extremely common for
Yeah.
that to
Yeah.
happen.
It's super common. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Same thing happened to a friend of mine. We actually made like a parody video that was like a send up. So when my friend got married, we decided as a secret like special project for him, we were gonna put together this like funny like video that was an accumulation of like all the in jokes we had ever done in Japan, like all the crazy
Oh,
escapades, everything that was like funny, and we wrapped it in this story of it was all like based off of like the idea that the Dragon Balls are real, and so we like linked all these things together, and the idea behind it was at the very beginning of the movie we got my friend to be in it without knowing the sort of film he was going to be in. We were like, we're doing this like collection of our experiences in Japan, and we thought it was really funny the one time you had a cold and you went to the doctor and they gave you an IV. And so I wrote out this script where he was like, oh, I'm like super ill. And he gave this like impossibly high temperature. He was like, I've got a fever of 200 Fahrenheit, right? Which is like, and is that normal for a cold? And the doctor is just like, yeah, it's fine. I'll just put you on an IV. And then the next scene, he's dead. Um, we didn't tell him that part was going to happen. And then the whole rest of the plot of this video was us reviving him with the Dragon Balls. And we used that as an excuse to like put in a bunch of in jokes and things that like
Uh,
were specifically targeted to him. So it was
that's
a really
awesome.
fun video project for us all to do as friends, and it made a great like presentation at his wedding. But it was so funny that like the like go-to experience that started it off was, oh yeah, the doctor's just going to put you on an IV.
Uh, because I think it must be the same in America, right? IV is normally not extremely serious, but you have to reach a certain level of
Right.
severity for them to go, yeah, we're going to put you
Yeah.
on an IV.
It's not like you
What?
go in with a cold and they're like, okay, time to hook you up.
Yeah, exactly. I personally never been on an IV in my life. I hope I
Yeah,
never
neither am
be
I.
on one. My God.
Yep.
The other thing he had, which was he found shocking, was when he went to the receptionist, or maybe to the doctor. I can't remember now who it was. He was given crayons and he had to draw what his problem was.
Wow. Yeah, that's new to me. I went to the doctor in Japan a good number of times, and I never had to draw with crayons.
Oh, is it maybe a language thing because you could actually speak, whereas
Maybe,
maybe Chris was so
maybe,
restricted he had to actually draw with crayons, or maybe not.
yeah, maybe it's a language thing. That's what I'm starting to think. Is that it's like, okay, you can't tell us what's wrong, so you're going to have to draw, and we happen to have these crayons. Because I could always talk to the doctor.
Hmm. Because I guess they have the crayons for like the kids, right, when they're waiting in the
Yeah.
but yeah, I found that really funny. He must have been. I can't remember now what was wrong with him. I can't remember now exactly what his issue was. I think it was something fairly innocuous, maybe like a cold. Um,
Hmm.
but it must have been something quite. It must be very shocking for him when they're saying like, "You have to draw this."
Yeah, it
Um,
must have been. I would be pretty astonished if they asked that of me, which is why I know they never did.
hmm. So there you go. And also then cost. I just wrote down cost, which is no use to me in terms of Chris's experience. But what's the deal? I mean, if you go like you said, you had to go to like the GP a few times.
Hmm.
How is the cost relative to US for that type of service?
Way, way cheaper.
Okay,
It's not even close.
okay.
It's way cheaper.
But
Yeah. It's
there is a cost.
uh it depends on the specific situation. So I when I went to the doctor for most occasions, it was through the government healthcare plan.
Okay.
So and part of that, a lot of the reasons I would go to the doctor in the first place is because, and I think I brought this up last time as well, we would have yearly checkups that we would have to take.
Right.
And
Yeah, we
so
did
the
talk
way it
about that.
is, you have your yearly health check, and the yearly health checks are free. They're also required of you. And then you, after the health check, they send you to someone who like specializes in that particular issue. And when you get to that phase, sometimes there's a fee. It sort of depends on the service and the nature of it. I'm not super familiar with the ins and outs because I didn't have to be. My friend, who we made this video for, had to be really well informed about the Japanese healthcare system because he had a lot of health problems. And
Mhm.
he couldn't even like it ended up being better for him not to be on the general like government plan. He had to get a private one just because it was a better or I can't remember exactly the details. It might have been like a step up government plan. It wasn't the basic one, is what I remember.
You get more
Um,
coverage that way.
right. And so that way he ended up saving money because he had such like a specialized group of issues that they needed to deal with. He ended up saving money on a specialized plan. But I was able to get by on the general like regular level plan, and the doctor's fees were like really really cheap, and like $10-20, and in the states like that's absurd. And the one time there was one time I went to Japan where my ears got blocked up with wax,
Hmm.
and this is a problem that's happened to me at several points throughout my life. There's something weird about the like shape of my inner ear canals that makes me more susceptible to developing this issue. And so I've gone to places like clinics in the US and had to pay for this sort of treatment. And at the time, I didn't have insurance in the States when I was because I was young. Um, and then when I was in Japan, I also didn't have insurance. And so it was also the sort of medical like situation where I could afford to go and shop around, right? It's like, okay, I can't hear out of one ear, but I can still get by, right? And I've got kind of an annoying headache, but I could still get by. It's not like debilitating. I don't have zero options when it comes to getting care. So I was actually able to form a fairly decent comparison between Japan, where I had this issue and didn't have insurance, and the States when I had this issue and didn't have insurance. And in the States, you go around to different places and it'd be like, okay, we'll charge you like $300 to get you looked at. You go to another place, they're like, we'll charge you $150 to get this looked at, right?
Jeez,
So
yeah.
I could go around and find one that would do it for like 100 something. And again, that's without insurance because this was before we had access to the like healthcare marketplaces, the Affordable Care Act,
Mm.
which still doesn't have a government option, but at least people get insurance. Um, so I don't know what the situation would be like under my current plan, but at the time it was $100 for the clinic that I went to. And I remember I had this issue in Japan and I was like worried because I had a specific amount of money that I'd set aside for the trip. And if it was going to be a $300 price tag because I didn't have insurance in Japan, like I was going to be in trouble.
Mm.
And so I was worried, but I was like, I don't want to spend my entire trip like miserable, like with a headache and not really being able to hear out of one ear. I think it's going to be worth, like, if I have to change my plans, I can change my plans. It's worth it for me to get this taken care of. So my friends looked up a doctor. We tried going to a pharmacist, and the pharmacist was like, oh, you should go to this clinic. So we went to the clinic. And not only did they solve the problem for 4,000 yen, which like at the time was about $40, so less than half of what I paid in the US. They also used a much more involved procedure. In the US, what they do is they like get this they like melt the wax in your ear down so that it's like compacted, and then they get a device that can spray water into your ear, and they
Mm.
spray water until the wax comes out,
Yeah.
and that clears the blockage. What the place that I went to in Japan did was they had this like little camera mounted on like a mini little like vacuum,
Mm.
and they put that into your ear and they sucked out all the wax.
Yeah.
And it was much more seemingly high tech procedure for less than half the price. And after I had that experience, I was just like, yeah, the US doesn't understand healthcare. Like our system is broken. Okay, this is good to know.
Realization made. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, because I think I've always lived under a system, whether it's in the UK or in Spain, where I mean, at the point of use, healthcare is free.
Mm-hmm.
There are some exceptions to that rule, but I mean, it's funny you mentioned that. I mean, that's a procedure I've had done as well.
Mm-hmm.
Not on the podcast, but we might have to talk about earwax because I've got the same issue. I seem to produce a lot of it,
Mm.
and
Yeah,
I
sorry if
had
this is grossing everyone out. I didn't
I
intend
know I
that.
do apologize, but it's hey, everyone has it.
Yeah.
But I had the same procedure, and again, I had it with the water.
Mm-hmm.
But I've weirdly just doing research and stuff on I've seen um, ear specialists in the UK use the system of either a vacuum or a hook to sort of
Mm-hmm.
manually pull it out, but it has a camera mounted on it as well, or has a camera mounted further back, so you do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Rather than just shining a bright light down it and hoping you can see it.
Yeah.
Um,
It was
but
like
yeah,
projected. I could see what the doctor was looking at because it was projected onto like a big screen. It was wild.
I mean, I think in the States too they have it, but I guess you're looking at then price points, and that's the
Oh
problem,
yeah.
right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, again, this is where things start getting political, but I cannot be convinced under any scenario how anybody could justify a healthcare system which is not free at the point of use. I just don't
Mm-hmm.
buy it. It'd be interesting if anybody can justify it. I can't see how. But then again, I've been very lucky to live
Mm-hmm.
in two countries where the point of use things have been free.
Hmm.
That procedure I had done was free because I was able to do it through the university GP, so that was free. Um,
Nice.
the only thing I've had to pay for, I mean, I've been very lucky as well. I've not had a lot of medical issues, which, especially in my adult life, um, which have potentially caused complications. But the only thing I've had to pay for would be dentistry. Um, in the UK, dentistry is free up to the age of 17. 16 or 17. It might be different in Scotland or England because the health system is devolved for the Scottish administration, so then it might be a slightly different rule. But I got free dentistry, so I had braces when I was younger, and
Hmm.
that was completely free. So I had it
Nice.
under the age of 17. Now, when I've had dentistry done more recently, not that I've had anything procedures done. I've been very lucky, but even if it's a checkup or just getting X-rays just to make sure everything's okay, I still had to pay. But
Hmm.
I'll happily pay, you know, how much of it, like £25 for an X-ray, um,
Hmm.
rather than don't do it and then get lumbered with goodness knows how much down the line. Um, in Spain, I went to I've been to the dentist once in Spain. I need to do it again soon. And I did have to pay quite a lot of money, but they did do a very good job in terms of checking everything, X-rays, scrubbing, cleaning, like the whole lot. Um, so yeah, and I've also, I mean, not the most positive of stories, but and I won't say exactly who, but there's been a member of my wife's family who suffered a stroke,
Mm.
and ended up having to spend uh, about 3 months in hospital.
Hmm.
Um, not only being in the ward for 3 months, firstly in the intensive, and then got moved to a different hospital where they were able to have sort of more longer term care before they were able to go back home. But also then I think inside the hospital and then outside the hospital, a total of I think about 18 months of physiotherapy, um, completely free. Hasn't had to
Nice.
pay a single penny to the state. The
That's
state has
incredible.
covered everything. And when you talk to this person, they have zero complaints
Hmm.
about the system. Um,
Right.
yeah, I'm sorry. I cannot be I cannot be persuaded. And public healthcare systems do have issues. They
Hmm.
are in Spain and in the UK. They are overburdened. They have not got sufficient resources, and then you're looking as well. I mean, there was a thing in the news recently about um, the cost of that. In this case, it was just obesity. The cost towards the
Hmm.
health system in terms of the long term effects of obesity on the population. We were talking about
Right.
smoking in the last podcast.
Hmm.
You could probably, I mean, it's very hard to put an exact number on it, but you can probably put a predicted estimate on it. And that's not me complaining about smokers or people who are obese, right? It is a societal problem. It's not an individual
Right.
problem. A society has to fix it. It's not an individual problem. And I mean, individuals can do stuff about it, but it's not as simple as that, right? And you look at just the
Hmm.
sheer cost, um, you know, the amount of money that you'd have to put into, in my opinion, good food programs and education would be a fraction of the amount of money you'd have to spend on treating people down the line, and then also then thinking about lower productivity and all this sort of stuff, right?
Hmm.
um so I mean, the public healthcare systems have huge challenges, and they're not
Yes.
perfect, and I don't
No.
want to say that they're perfect, but I cannot, yeah, I can't even think from the person's perspective. Like, I mean, I've heard stories from the US, like people don't want to call ambulances because of the cost
Right. Yeah, they cost so much
associated.
money. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. Like I'm not saying that public healthcare systems are perfect, but I think my experience, I'll stick to my experience because I can say this without any doubts. My
Mm.
experience is that the country where I had access to government healthcare, I had better outcomes with the healthcare system.
So yeah,
It's as
I
simple
think.
as that. Like as far as I'm concerned, like that converted me.
Mhm. Yeah. And you don't have to. It's not even like, even if the quality is the same, you don't live in fear that you can't afford to get ill.
Right.
And in here in our society, it's just a case of, oh, I can't afford to be ill because I've got work to do. It's not a
Hmm.
case of I can't afford to be ill because I literally cannot afford it.
Right.
um, and life's unpredictable, right? And I think that's
It
the
is.
problem. A lot of people
Honestly,
complain.
like the one thing that you can say is at some point in every single person's life, they are going to need medical care and eventually
Yes,
they're going to pass away.
yeah,
And if
of course,
we're not planning for that, what are we doing?
yeah,
It's ridiculously short-sighted. I have this whole thing where I feel like we have not, like, we build our houses and our like roads. We've built our society around these people who function like supermen, and
mm,
nobody is. Nobody
yeah,
is superhuman. Nobody is going to maintain perfect capabilities throughout their entire lives. Why don't we make it easier for other people to live?
yeah,
But we've
totally.
gotten very potentially controversial with these statements.
I mean, maybe, but I would say bring it on. I love to see somebody argue the opposite. See what possible argument there could be. I can't think of any, but then maybe I'm inside my own little bubble in terms
Yeah.
of my views on it. But I mean, yeah, yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree anymore, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of like, do there have to be conversations in terms of how countries deal with um, aging populations and
Mm-hmm.
long-term care, and the consequences of smoking and obesity and alcohol and all these sort of things? Absolutely, 100%. There has to be some tough
Mm-hmm.
conversations about how we deal with this. Where where does the where do the costs fall onto and all this sort of thing? But yeah, I would never want to live under a system that is not. At least, I mean, I'm not saying. I mean, like in Spain, same as the UK, you've got public and private. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to go private, you have the money, and you can go private, and you might get seen quicker, and jump
Mm-hmm.
the waiting line. Go for it. But for the people who cannot afford it, there has to be a backup option. You can, and it has to be good enough. It has to be, well resourced. It has to be. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but there you go. But I just find it very, interesting that seeing that sort of um, comparison, and then he was talking about a cost, but I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking, well, that compared to the UK, because GB visits are free in the UK,
Mm-hmm.
um, but still the cost, I guess, then compared to for you would be very low. So that turned out to be the case.
Yep.
Um,
Absolutely.
there are other things. I mean, long-term care in terms of like care homes, obviously you don't are not free in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
Um, prescription drugs, I think, are still free in Scotland. In England, you have to pay. But
Mm.
for the actual GP visit, free. Um, a lot of long-term treatments like cancer, I think, is free in the UK, unless it's an if it's an experimental drug that the NHS does not fund, then you have to pay.
Mm.
Um, I think physiotherapy is free if it is deemed as essential. If you've had an accident, for example,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but you can also pay for private physiotherapy as well. Um, I think the thing that's going to have to change down the line is also, I think, the way that mental health is treated. I think there
Yeah.
has to be a lot
Mm-hmm.
more publicly funded mental health services.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something that is still evolving. I think still there's still a bit of denial about how mental health is treated.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
something that's
I
sort of in
have
the transition.
yeah. I think I mentioned this in the last one, but my dad works in education systems and helps teachers deal with students who have special needs.
Hmm.
And it's pretty astonishing the extent to which it still hasn't sunk in that some of these people, right, if you just do some certain things differently, you will make these kids' lives so much better.
Right.
Like
Right.
there, just to give you an example of the sort of thing I'm talking about, there was this kid who apparently would throw a tantrum at this one specific moment when they had to get on a bus. And the school solution was to get a bunch of strong guys to get the kid onto the bus. because as long as the kid got onto the bus, that kid would be fine. They would come right back down. They would just have this like instant moment of trauma in getting onto the bus. And my dad was like called in to consult, and he was like, okay, so what we need to do is just address this like phobia of the moment of getting onto the bus, and then we solve the problem. Not only do we solve the problem for the kid, we solve the problem for the people that you have to call out every day to drag this kid onto the bus, which is not, I'm sure that's not a pleasant experience, right? And it's just like, okay, well, we can address that. And my dad has like specific plans that he can come up with that they can implement and then be like, okay, this is now a solved problem.
Hmm. You got that
But
long-term solution rather than short-term fix every time.
right, yeah, but in the moment, right, like all the from the school's perspective, right, it's just like, okay, well, we're stressed. This is a time sensitive situation. These kids need to get home. These buses need to get out. We just need the short term solution, right? And that's all they're looking at. So it's not like I don't understand, but sometimes it's like, okay, I understand that, maybe the first time it happens, but you can be a little bit more proactive next time, right?
Right, right. I feel that's the thing.
So,
I see it with certain things, not even for mental health, even physical health. There's a
mm-hmm,
lot about reactive intervention
mm-hmm,
um, rather than looking at root causes. I think, well,
mm-hmm,
if we could just not, I mean, obviously for the people who've already got the condition or whatever, sure, then you have to help
mm-hmm,
them out with interventions. But what about the next generation? We need to get to the root cause of whatever the problem is. And not just keep relying on short-term fixes because it's not going to work. It's going to be more costly in the long run. That's the issue. But,
mm-hmm.
what have we got? I think I'm looking at we've done about 2.5 hours.
Yep.
I'm looking at stuff that's left. I think a lot of it we could probably skip. There's only maybe a couple of things.
Okay.
First one is a very quick thing. The concept of key money.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
I thankfully didn't have to deal with that because in the jet program I inherited a an apartment, but
mm,
it's a huge hurdle for people to jump over when they come to Japan.
So from how I understand it,
Especially,
it's
go
almost
ahead.
like an additional rental fee they have to pay on top of your initial
Yes.
deposit.
Yep, that's exactly what it is.
And what is the justification for this additional? It's additional. It's maybe 1 or 2 months rent on top.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's usually 2 months, I think, 2 months worth of rent. Um, and as far as I know, it's about like in case they need to come in and fix up the place after you leave. I don't know. Like, again, I never had to deal with this system, thankfully. So I just heard about it and how awful it was. But I haven't, because I don't have the direct experience, I don't want to like speak out of turn and be like, oh,
mm,
it's this is the justification and this is why it actually makes or doesn't make sense because I don't really know. All I know is it's an additional fee that they charge you in addition to like first and last. Um,
but is it refundable?
oh, I don't think. See, again, I don't know. Let me. I'm gonna look this up
Because
because I don't think it is.
okay, because while you're looking it up, I'll explain. So in the at least in the Scottish system, I can only speak about the Scottish system. I don't know how Spain works. I don't know how England works, but in the Scottish system, when you go to rent a flat, you will often have to pay maybe 2 months up front, maybe a month up front. It just depends on how the letting agency will do it. But then there will also be a deposit. The deposit is normally a proportion of the rent. It's never as high as 2 months.
Hmm.
I can't remember how much our deposits were. I think I had to pay maybe about a £500 deposit, and the rent was maybe about 700, £800 a month. So it's about 75% maybe of the first rent. I guess it depends. I don't think it can be any more than the first month's rent, but maybe I'm wrong. But it is actually a deposit. It is meant to be in place for if when you leave, if the flat has to be thoroughly clean, if you leave it in a state, if there's
Hmm.
repairs to be done, they'll take off the deposit if it's something that they justify that you damaged the place. But the way it's done in Scotland, in theory, as long as your landlord or the letting agency are not crooked, is the money goes into a deposit system, so the government holds the money, and you can actually get when it gets done, the tenant will get a code and says that the money is being held in this. This is your reference number, and then when
Hmm.
you leave, the agency will assess the situation, and then they will message you and say how much they're charging out of your deposit. I've only had two rented flats in Edinburgh. The first one charged us for cleaning, which I tried to fight against, but at the end, because I was busy doing other things, I couldn't keep I
Yeah.
couldn't keep fighting it. But it wasn't very much. So that gets deducted, and then the rest of the money comes back to you. You can contact the agency and say, "Okay, I want my money back," and then they send it to you. The second letting agency I went with, it transpires that they hadn't done it. So I
Oh
was
wow.
contacting the deposit sort of agency saying, "I need my deposit back. I'm with this," and I told them my address and the name of the letting agent. They're like, "We have no record of your deposit."
Wow.
So one sternly written letter or email, I can't remember what it was, to the letting agency later, suddenly 500 quid ended up in my bank account. Say, okay, we're all fine. Nothing to see here.
Wow.
So I got the money back, fortunately. Um, but that's how it works. I don't know. I guess in England there must be a similar scheme, but I don't know the ins and outs. I don't want to speak for it just in case it's a devolved thing. And in Spain, I don't know either.
Okay,
Uh,
so I've looked this up. Key money, Daekeen, literally gratitude money. I'm on Wikipedia, so maybe take
mhm,
this with a grain of salt. But it's telling me that it's a mandatory payment to the landlord that is often the same amount as the original deposit. However, Daekeen can be the equivalent of 6 months or more of rent, but it's typically the same as 1 to 3 months. I think in my case, like I was saying before, standard was 2 months.
mhm.
This money is considered a gift to the landlord and is not returned until after the lease is canceled.
Okay, so it is a
So
refundable
it
deposit,
is returned, yeah. But
but still, it's a
that
lot of
that
money.
phrasing about this is considered a gift to the landlord, I'd heard that before, and that's why I thought you might not get it back.
Right, right.
So I
Just asking for trouble.
that cleared things up for me. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's a
Mm,
huge. It's sort of like I'm reminded of. I think I was talking about this in the last podcast. How like, yeah, in theory you pay into the pension system for retirement, and you can get all that money back, but you have to have like a tax representative. Like you can get a certain amount out for like easy, and then you have to get a tax representative, and they have to like pursue your case after you leave the country as a foreigner, right? So it then takes a year, and then there's a whole other system that could like grind down and end up just holding onto your money. So I happen to get my money back that I paid into the pension system, but I can easily imagine there are other ALTs who go
mm.
to work in Japan and they never get the money that they pay into the pension system back.
No, I can imagine. And the minute you leave too, and
Yeah.
you've got that distance in terms of time and physical space from the system,
Hmm.
it's even harder to try and get it back then. Yeah.
Yeah. I imagine actually that some of the other people in my group who had the same tax representative as me didn't get their money back either because it was only after I think it was like 2 years later that I went back and I stayed in touch with my old supervisor who was my tax representative. And I was like, I'm just going to drop by the office and be like, hey, have you processed this paperwork yet? And he was like, oh no, I'll get right on it. So I sort of
He
forced
jogged his
him.
memory.
Right, forced him by reappearing in the country after a couple years to be like, this procedure needs to be done, and that's what finally resolved it for me. So if some of my other fellow ALTs maybe didn't have the luxury of going back to Japan to pester him, they might not have gotten their money back.
Hmm. He must have gone. His face must have gone like white as a sheet when you just walked in, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh no,
Yep,
I'm back.
that's right.
Do my
It
taxes."
was, it was a different office too, so he must have felt like I like tracked him down.
Oh, oh dear. There you go. So I thought it was quite interesting that key money, and that is a lot of money to pay up front. Uh,
It's huge. Yeah, there's a reason a lot of foreigners don't like paying key money and renting places in Japan. It's very difficult.
Understandable. Um, something very it's just something that was comical. I do not expect a huge amount of comment from this. A, because maybe you haven't experienced it, and B, if you have, I would fully understand your privacy to not say it out loud on the podcast. But Chris had I can't remember the exact Japanese phrase, but Chris had an experience going to a love hotel,
Oh, okay.
and apparently they're quite a thing.
Yeah, they're all over the place.
um,
I have been to a love hotel once, and it was not under the intended situation. It was because my friends and I were going to an international meeting of like I have the Japanese phrase in my head. It's kokusai koryukai, but I don't know
how to
uh,
translate? It's like
how
being
to translate it.
Alimentation Infantil earlier.
Yeah. It's like an international friendship meeting, right? It was
I
the
see.
idea that they were going to have these Japanese people and these foreigners were all going to get together and we were going to have this experience in this one part of Tohoku where the snow, sort of like Chris Broad was saying, gets very high. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
we're all going to go snowshoeing and do ice fishing and skiing and do all these winter activities. And the people they really wanted to get were all the ALTs who had no experience of winter. And the people they got were all the ALTs who were missing the winter activities and knew how to do a lot of, if not all of those things themselves. I'd never been ice fishing before. That was super cool. And I liked snowshoeing as well. But
Oh,
uh,
nice.
we decided to like drive down because Tohoku is a fairly large region. And my friends and I all decided to carpool and drive down from like way, way up north in Aomori to in uh, Bandai, I think it was. The in like much further south. And so it was going to be a multi-day car ride. And so we got in and we found out like partway through the ride that we weren't going to be able to stay at the hotel we planned at. And so it then became a question of where can we find as we drive across the country that we can get hotel rooms at 3 in the morning
Oh no.
when literally every place is closed. And we were just like constantly refreshing Google Maps, and finally a hotel came up, and it was just like because on Google Maps they don't call them love hotels, that's colloquial. They call them couples hotels. Um,
mm,
and so it was like, okay, let's go to this place, and we had to like because a lot of these places are constructed, as I understand it, to like allow you to very easily like come in and never have to interact with anyone. But because this one was in the middle of nowhere and it was the dead of the night, we had to like wake up the proprietor and get her to let us into our rooms because they were all locked.
oh no.
And so it was just, yeah, me and my friends, we had to spend the night there. And so we stayed. But that is the extent of experience that I've had with a love hotel.
Okay, maybe. I mean, interesting that you've been to one, but probably not the same type of experience that Chris went. He went with a
No,
more
I'm sure it's
with
very different.
with the intention of
Yeah, the
utilizing the love
intended
hotel
purpose.
for the intended
Yeah.
purpose, but he ended up getting chucked out because his bank card stopped working.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, awkward to say the least. But he had to go
Very
down,
awkward.
left
Ugh.
left his date upstairs,
Ugh.
and went downstairs to try and pay, and it didn't work because something was wrong with his bank card, or maybe his bank card had stopped working because it thought that it was
It
being
was a
used
fraudulent
suspiciously.
purchase.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
something along those lines. So yeah, that date didn't end too well, unfortunately.
I can imagine not.
Oh, oh dear.
Oh
It
man.
was quite nice. Unfortunately, that it's according to the book at least anyway that he has remained friends with that date. Not that they dated again, but they've remained friends and
Hmm.
they're in good contact. But yeah, I found that quite funny. And he did also talk, I mean, obviously this is not something that is necessarily exclusive to Japan, but he and one of his colleagues went to what he called, I guess, like a gentleman's club,
Hmm.
where there are these women who will sit with you and keep you company while you're drinking whatever you
Oh,
want to
yep.
drink. And it's all very like extremely superficial,
Mm-hmm.
and they're pretending to be your friend and all this sort of thing. And yeah. It's he. It was quite a theme through the book that Chris was drinking quite a bit and experiencing quite a lot of the nightlife, and but seeing it in quite a sort of a sort of shocked curiosity, everything he was experiencing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah,
yeah,
I've never really like I was saying before, I've never really experienced that aspect of Japan personally. I've read a little bit about it. There's a book, I think they made it into like an HBO series. Tokyo Vice, I want to say it's called.
hmm
Um, I read that as an audiobook and it's fascinating about this guy who like made a whole life for himself as a reporter on a Japanese newspaper and his experience of working in Japan, and especially when he got put on the Vice beat. But I was just like really interested to hear about how it affected his life. It like destroyed his life.
wow,
He was like, I had to basically stop and leave Japan to like come back to being human again. It was
goodness.
incredible. Yeah, and apparently he got like roped in with the criminal organizations and things, and
Well, I was
it
gonna.
sounded absolutely wild.
Well, I was thinking like the not even the patrons, but the women who have to work in these clubs and things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I guess you'd call it a club. Yeah, I guess so. In that sense, like a gentleman's club. The things they must see and the things they must hear from the
It's got to be
patrons and stuff.
awful.
It's good, yeah, awful, but also just like so many scandals and goodness, what sort of people they're mixing with.
Mm-hmm.
And then there might be just innocent people, I say, quote unquote, like going right, who just want to have a nice
Mm-hmm.
time. The things they must hear and experience must be ridiculous. It's
Mm-hmm.
yeah, crazy. Um, yeah. The only other thing, I mean, Chris talked quite a bit about his the memorizing all the kanji. But that's something that we can
Yep.
definitely come when we do our language learning podcast. We definitely come back to because
Yeah, that's
it's
definitely gonna come up.
having him saying like here's a list of 2,000, and he was sitting there before going to work every day, scribbling, trying to memorize all these kanji and stuff, and getting through
Yep.
it. And then the realization hit once he memorized it. He goes, right, how do I use them in a conversation
Mm-hmm.
or whatever? Um, the only other thing, um, I wrote it down. I suddenly realized I wrote it wrong. But never mind. Towards the end of the book, Chris experienced a missile warning. I can't
Oh
remember
yeah.
where he was or where he was. He was trying to shoot a documentary. But I can't remember where exactly he was and what. Maybe he must be on the west coast, maybe given proximity and stuff. But anyway, this is around the period of time. I know this might not have overlapped when you were there, but the sort of the North Korea
Yep.
missile threats and things.
Mm-hmm.
And typical, typical Brit. He he faced it all with just not with fear, but just sort of the sort of in condemnation of how dare the North Koreans disrupt my sleep
Yeah.
with with their missile threats. Um, and then I wrote it down incorrectly. I remember it was the missile, but I also wrote down earthquake, right? Because I know.
Mm-hmm.
Did you, when you were in Japan, did you experience either? And what was it like? And
Yes.
I know maybe there's like earthquake training that the kids and stuff have to go through at the school. So did you have to do that? What was it like? All that stuff.
I didn't do earthquake training at the schools, but that was part of the orientation process for me. They
Mm.
made us do like earthquake training and gave us like guidebooks and things. It wasn't the most involved thing. Like I've seen videos of people who go to like disaster simulation centers and they like get blasted with heavy rain and have to like or like they've got these like special plates that will move to like simulate an earthquake, and they have to react to that. It's all very high tech and fancy. That's not the experience I had at all. It was just okay, get to a door frame. Like sort of like you would experience with a fire, where it's like, don't leave things around. Here's a kit, like here's a list of things you should have in a kit ready to grab in case there's an earthquake, right? Be careful how you stack things because the buildings are going to sway. um, it was much more like pedestrian level sort of thing. um, and for the most part, like for the most part, the thing that I'd say about earthquakes is it was astonishing to me how quickly they just became a nuisance. Because before I went to Japan, I would think, oh man, it must be terrifying to live through an earthquake, like experience that. And had this idea of how, like, man, the one thing you can always count on is the ground beneath your feet. And then all of a sudden everything starts swaying. It's got to be terrifying, right? And you'd be sitting having a meal, and things will shake for a bit and then it'll stop. And it'd be like, okay, well, that was an earthquake.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to keep eating. And then if they get a little bit more serious, I have experienced that same sort of irritation where it's like, why is there an earthquake right now? I'm trying to sleep. I don't want my building to be shaking. I don't want to go stand in the doorway. And then it usually calms down and stops. The one thing that really um, changed was when I went through, because I was there, I was living in Japan when they had the big Tohoku Daishinsai, which is the major earthquake, tsunami, nuclear meltdown disaster that I think probably everyone's familiar with. I think that was fairly
Yep.
widely covered abroad. And I was there for that. I was teaching at a school when it happened because it happened like in the middle of the day, and it was in March. So it was also a particularly, well, not super cold, but it was a cold day in March. And I was up north. So like maybe in Tokyo it was easier to get people outside, but I remember like running outside, and like we had to make runs into and out of the building to get the kids their coats because it was so cold and everyone was freaking out. Nobody knew what to do. We lost power for days, right?
Oh goodness.
Uh, yeah. So it was terrible. And all the cell phone signals stopped working, which I hadn't anticipated. It's something they tell you about. And so I had heard it, and I wasn't like shocked when my cell phone didn't work, but it was a weird realization, sort of like the car traffic thing I was talking about earlier, where it's like you like try and use your cell phone for its intended purpose, and literally nothing happens, or you get a busy signal, and you're like, what's going on? Oh right, it's an earthquake.
Mm-hmm.
So a huge natural disaster. I guess it's that one was pretty national as well.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I just remember trying to figure out what to do. And I got told later. So like one of the things I was like, because I was starting to get into my walking kick. So I was like, well, I don't need to take the buses everywhere because I'm sure the buses aren't running, but I need to get back to my area. And things seemed to have stabilized at the schools. Schools were also like most schools. I don't know if literally all, but I think all the schools in Hachinohe, at least where I was living, are also evacuation centers.
Right.
So if people needed to get any place safe, they would come to the school. But at a certain point in the afternoon, it was like, okay, things seem to have subsided. We might have to worry about aftershocks, but we can start sending people home. And so I started walking back home, being like, all right, well, I know the route. I don't need to rely on the buses, which probably aren't running, or if they are running in a weird way. I'm just going to walk back. And so I walked past the elementary school that's associated with the middle school I was teaching at, and like I waved hi to the kids on my way by, and some of the teachers, like when I went to that elementary school later, were like, that was really helpful. Like all the kids like looked over and started like yelling, oh Matthew, um and like really lifted their spirits. And I was like,
Oh.
oh nice, that's really like nice to hear, because I was just waving out of like pure nervous energy. But they didn't know that. So it was nice to find out about that later. And then it was like, all right, well, now I got to go back to the office, figure out what's going on. Um, and at the office, they were like, why are you here? And it's like, well, I don't know what to do. They were like, okay, you can go home. You can like maybe think about taking shelter because nobody knew like uh, the power was out. So
Mm.
the whole system for like what was gonna normally the first thing you do when there's an earthquake is you turn on the TV because it's gonna be on the news and you're gonna get like instructions and things. But when the power's out, you can't do that. So I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm gonna go home. And I was living very close to another ALT, and he was married at the time, I think, if I'm remembering the timeline correctly. I might not be. It's been a long time. Um, but he and his wife had a car. And so they have TVs in Japanese cars. So we were able to get into the car and figure out what was going on because the car power still worked
Oh
and
wow.
figure out what was going on across the country. And one of the places that actually was on the news, like in the first like news images that started coming out of the earthquake, happened to be from Hachinohe because it was positioned such that it was a city that was severely impacted by the earthquake, but nowhere near as severely as the places that were actually close to like the, I forget what it's called, the epicenter, um, where like they were absolutely devastated by the earthquake and or the tsunami. Hachinohe also suffered. I don't want to make light of that. There were thousands of people, right, whose lives were affected in Hachinohe. But compared to the destruction that was happening in other parts of the country, it was relatively less. And so, and this would actually come into play later because the power stayed out for, I think, maybe 3 days, 3 to 4 days. I forget exactly how long it was at this point. But uh, it actually came back to Hachinohe earlier than anywhere else because of that same relative position where it's like, okay, if we establish a base of operations here, we can send relief operations to other parts of Aomori Prefecture using Hachinohe as a base. So we were like prioritized for getting back up and running.
Oh wow.
So yeah, and sort of similar to that situation, they were also broadcasting um, footage of what happened to the Hachinohe Harbor. And so you'd see, we turned on the TV and look at, like, I've been on walks and run a marathon down by the Hachinohe Harbor, and so I knew that coastline pretty well. And there's boats just up onto the on the road left behind in the wake of the tsunami, which again relatively lesser than other places in the country, but still like this weird sense of like, oh, everything's wrong. Why is there a boat in the middle of the main road, like down by the pier? That's bizarre. And overturned like just all sorts of damage along the coast. And so a lot of those early images were from Hachinohe. Again, because it was in sort of this weird situation where they could get enough things working that you could start broadcasting images of it very quickly.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was absolutely wild.
It must
And
it must be crazy to like have that situation where you've got something like a natural disaster like that where you're getting drip fed this information on the news, but it's on such a national scale, right? You
mm-hmm,
are in your school, the earthquake happens, but in that moment you're not even contemplating what could be happening the next city down the coast or further down the
right.
country. And then it's
Mm-hmm,
only then once you do manage to get a newspaper or turn on the TV, or I guess now it'd be different because of data and mobiles and things. Um, you see the devastation that is happening, and it's happening all throughout the country, and everyone's been affected by it, but the severity level is just so different.
mm-hmm,
I can't think of anything that has happened in the UK in my lifetime that is of that sort of nature where the whole country is living it. I
mm-hmm,
guess pandemic would be something like that, but it's not quite the same. It's not something that is so explosive.
mm-hmm,
I mean, we've had things like terrorist attacks, but they're always so localized. I'm not saying that it doesn't make it any less shocking, but it's not as if everybody in the country has lived it in the same
mm-hmm,
way as something like a national earthquake. In Spain, we've had something recently. It's very sad. We've had on the east coast of Spain, especially around the Valencia region, there's been really terrible flooding. There's a very particular type of storm system that occurs along the Mediterranean coast, and it's hit
Mm-hmm.
Valencia really badly this year. Um, and I think I don't know what it's almost like I think now it's over 200 people have died, and
Wow.
a huge portion of the actual city. It's not just some, not that makes any better or worse or more serious or less serious. It's not like some little village has been affected. It is actually the Valencia capital, like city, has been. There's a huge portion of it that got really devastated with flooding. It's still under mud. They're all trying to clear it all. A lot of people have, lost their all their possessions and their houses and having to rebuild. And there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of protests now about who can they blame for this. That's probably the only thing, but again, it's not a whole Spain thing. Even though
Mm-hmm.
the whole of Spain surely will have an opinion of it, but they're not living it. If that makes sense, it's not the same as being a whole
Yeah.
country getting hit by an earthquake or a tsunami or a hurricane or something, and everybody is in the same boat, but the
Mm-hmm.
severity is different depending on, and you're not aware of the situation. You
Mm-hmm.
experience it, but you don't know what's happening in Tokyo or whatever other city
Right.
it
Yeah,
is.
you don't have the whole picture. At least not at first. Like
Yes.
eventually we were able to get, like I said, we got to the car and then we got the power on a couple days later.
Hmm.
Um and we figured things out. But it was wild. And of course, I was like, all right, well, I need to try and get in touch with my family because they're going to be terrified. They're going to be seeing
Of
this on the
course.
news.
Yeah, yeah,
And I don't know like how I'm going to do that. It happened to be that I went to this particular payphone, which they still had. Payphones lasted longer in Japan than they did in the States,
yeah.
and uh, they're going away in Japan too. They might still be gone. They like in the time, or still they might now be gone. In the time I was living there, I witnessed several payphones get like taken out, but at the time of that particular earthquake, there was still a payphone out in front of City Hall that I knew for a fact was there. And I was like, I'm going to take a chance that I can make an international call on that payphone. And it turned out that it was like one of the very few payphones in the city, right? So there's already a few, like a relatively few payphones around. But of those, only a certain select number could make international calls. That one happened to be one of them.
Wow.
And so I just happened to be like, okay, I'm going to try and call an international number and see if I can get through to my parents. And was able to reassure them, be like, don't worry, like I wasn't caught up in the earthquake or the tsunami or any of the stuff you're reading about. I'm okay.
Hmm.
So I'm sure that was a huge relief to them.
If you don't
It
hear
was
from me for a
definitely,
few days, it's fine. I'm still here.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it was definitely a relief for me. But again, I couldn't give them any great, like, they probably knew more about the situation than I did at the time I called.
right. Because of the news
So,
coming in and stuff, even though there would be a time difference and things. Yeah, yeah,
hmm.
yeah. Yeah, and obviously
Actually, no, it
seeing,
would have been the middle of the night. It's been too long. I can't recall the specifics, unfortunately.
sure. No, that's understandable. It is quite a long time ago now. I think we've kind of forgotten how long it's passed since then. 'Cause I remember seeing it too. Not, yeah, I don't remember seeing the earthquake and the initial tsunami so much, but especially the fallout, especially with the is it
Hmm.
Fukushima,
Yep.
the nuclear plant and stuff, and everything that was
Hmm.
happening with that, and then obviously with the years gone by with updates from it. I think that's something
Yep.
that Chris
13
only
years ago now. Yeah.
wow, 13 years ago.
Almost 14 because it happened in March and we're turning the year. March
Yep,
11th, 2011.
goodness. Okay, time flies. I think it's something that I'm sure in the book Chris mentions going to some of the affected towns on the eastern coast who got hit by the
Hmm.
which got hit by the tsunami and trying to document a little bit about how the communities sort of rebuilt themselves. I'm more than sure that was in the book.
Hmm. Yeah, that
That's
became a major theme as I was living there. It's like, how are we going to rebuild?
hmm,
And what are we going to do? There's now like a national park chain that extends into Hachinohe. Right? Hachinohe is just one part of this really long like coastal trail that they decided to make a national park out of in sort of memoriam. I don't know exactly what the right term is, but to sort of say that this disaster happened. And that's
So,
something that, the particular trails weren't like connected and the whole thing wasn't completed for a long time. Like I, left Japan and came back and they were talking about how, oh, the trail's open now. It's like, oh, okay. They actually offered, because like I knew I was going to go walk the length of Japan by the time my contract was up, and there were a bunch of places where like, hey, we'll put you in the newspaper if you walk part of this, like the opening part of this trail that we're working on as part of your walk across Japan. And I was like, I do not want to be in the newspaper. Thank you very much.
ah, there's introverted Rick coming back.
That's right.
Fair enough. Um, yeah, I've I mean, that's something, as you said, it's if the earthquakes normally you see them as a nuisance, right? Something that they always have to live with. But
Mm-hmm.
just because of the where it's situated, right? There's going to be another big one
Mm-hmm.
at some point. It's the same as like the western coast of the U.S., right?
Yep.
Was it is it San Andreas fault? Is that what it's called?
Sounds correct to me.
There's going to be a big one at some point. Um,
Yep.
hmm. I think in Europe we do, again Europe's fairly safe from these sort of things. I mean there are earthquakes about, um, but
Mm-hmm.
not to the same extent. I mean you got Vesuvius volcano in Italy, but again not many volcanoes about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the Canary Islands, which are Spanish territory, but off the coast of Africa, there was a volcano that erupted. I want to say 2 years ago now, but it's probably now closer to three. That was a big topic that came up in one of my classes. We used to talk about it quite a bit because I'm
Mm.
unfolding on the news. But then again, yeah, hurricanes, tornadoes, all that sort of stuff. It's just yeah, we don't experience it in the same way. The
Yeah.
British joke always happens every time there is relatively speaking, a moderate storm, and all the wheelie bins. I don't know, like the way you put your rubbish, but you keep it outside
Mm-hmm.
the house. When they get knocked over, it's always the meme appears on the internet of all the wheelie bins getting knocked over, and with the caption "We will rebuild." That is the level of
Yeah.
rebuilding that the British have to do. But then again, I mean, I joke about it. It's jest. That's the British way. We joke our way out of every problem. But we
Mm-hmm.
see, especially seeing the stuff that's happened in Valencia over the last. I mean, obviously by the time this podcast comes out, it's going to be a little bit old news. But this is why we try not talk about stuff that is really topical in the news because it can get outdated very quickly, which is
Mm-hmm.
the way the news cycle works. But yeah, just seeing it was just absolutely devastating to see. And it's also just the fact that the death toll is so high, even though these storms have happened before, but they've never been as deadly. It's like the deadliest one that has been on recorded history. So, um, yeah, there's a lot of anger and frustration, and then looking how the community's going to rebuild and all this sort of thing. So, it's
Yeah.
but I mean, in terms of earthquake, Japan must be very sort of technologically well set up to predict
Yeah, that's one of the
earthquakes and such.
things. That's one of the things that really struck me because while I was living in Japan, it was interesting because we would have all these earthquakes, and you would see because, like I said, you'd like turn on the TV, and it'd be like, okay, so it's in this area and it's this magnitude, right? And it'd be like, okay, if it's less than a magnitude 5, like you're probably not even gonna feel it, and if it's over that, right, like it starts to get serious. But all the like the buildings will sway a bit and then things will go back to normal. It's like, yeah, put your head under a desk, right? Beware of things that are going to fall on you. Um, maybe get to frame, if you're in a classroom situation, you've got another procedure, right? So it's like, this is what you do and you get through it. And then I remember having like looking up in the news, there was, I think it was in New Zealand. I want to say it was Christchurch, but again, this is a very long time ago. There was an earthquake of a magnitude that was like almost the same as one that we experienced in Japan,
Hmm.
and it absolutely leveled the place.
It did. Yeah, I do remember that earthquake. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it was like,
Christchurch, right?
major news headline, like tremendous problem, and it was like Yeah, the reason all these earthquakes that I'm experiencing in Japan seem like no big deal is because they've built their society to deal with that problem.
Right.
Like all the buildings, they've got the most advanced. Well, I don't know what the most advanced. But they've got very advanced, earthquake-proof technology. Right? It's not truly earthquake-proof, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Um,
To mitigate the effect, and then also then if it is going to be a very high magnitude in terms of try to get evacuation
mhm.
ahead of time rather than people trying to evacuate in the aftermath, which is going to be way more chaotic. Um,
Right.
yeah.
So it's just like wow, like it gave me a sudden appreciation for realizing, oh, okay, so like this is because this is where this is, right? We've got society built in such a way to deal with this problem. That's something that I also experienced where it's like, so I've always lived in parts of the world where lots of snow is fairly normal, like it's a regular occurrence. And so there's always, okay, it's winter, we have to deal with the snow, right? There's always that mentality. And you've got people who go out and they'll like plow the roads, and there's a whole system in place for how you can get things done. And like in Aomori, the city, the capital of Aomori Prefecture, there's at least one street where they've got a system set up because they're like right by this bay where they can take the seawater and pump it into the street, and the like natural salinity of the seawater will melt any like ice or snow that forms that gets in the road. So
Hmm.
they've got all these solutions to deal with the problem of the snow. And there are two things that struck me about this because first of all, in Hachinohe, the city where I was living, they basically took no precautions and tried to ignore the snow whenever it happened because even though it gets cold, it doesn't like the snow wouldn't commonly build up.
Hmm.
So they'd be used to the cold of winter, but anytime it snowed, people wouldn't know what to do. So they didn't have a
Yeah.
system in place. It wasn't like Albury City where they've got like their infrastructure set up for it, and it was just like, oh, okay, this is fine. And then also, so there was that experience of like, oh, like this is the same country even, and just from city to city, same problem, but because it's relatively rare in Hachinohe, they don't deal with it as well. And
Right.
so the same year, we heard about this big snowstorm in Washington, D.C. that nobody knew how to deal with. And all these people would be like, you said in America they know how to deal with snow. And I was like, I guess it's true in the States too, right? Like if
Hmm.
you're in a part of the country where you don't get a lot of snow, it can be a real serious disaster in a way that people who are used to dealing with snow and ice much more commonly don't think of it as.
Well, it's like everything, right? The humans just get used to their surroundings and their environment if there's suddenly a huge flux and something appears that
Yeah.
they're not expecting. I mean, you see it in the UK too, right? The UK is generally over time getting a little bit warmer. So
Mm-hmm.
snow is not. I mean, it's actually funny now that we're recording this. There's actually been a bit of a snowstorm that's passed through the UK, but the UK is not getting as much snow as it used to.
Mm-hmm.
So people are starting to become a lot more soft.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's becoming a case where if it's just a small flurry of snow, people panic. The roads grind to a halt. Airports just don't really know how to deal with it, even though they do have technology to clear the runways and stuff. There'll be delays, and it's starting to creep up the country. It used to be a thing when I was a kid that Scottish people would make fun of English people, going, "Oh, look at those English people! They can't cope with the snow." All those people in London, right? And now we heard it over the week, right, where Roscoe, our
Mm-hmm.
mutual Scottish friend and friend of the channel, was complaining about Scottish people not being able to cope with it. So it's,
Yeah.
the phenomenon is slowly creeping northward that people just can't deal with snow anymore. So it's just
Right.
yeah,
And that I think, right, that I think is the thing that you sort of have to watch out for because it's easy to trivialize something that you know how to deal with because you deal with it all the time. Whereas you may not be like keeping in mind the impact of something that someone who doesn't know how to deal with it and is dealing with it for like the first time is
right,
going through.
yes,
And
that's true.
so yeah, like that's sort of the realization that I had when it was like, oh yeah, like what is this snow? Why do they just leave it on the ground in Hachinohe? This is ridiculous. Like these cars are driving around, and if they don't plow the roads, so they just create these like lanes of where the cars go,
Oh,
and snow is like banked up on every other side. So if you ever want to take a turn where nobody else has turned before, good luck.
right, and all the
You're
compacted snow in the lane then becomes very icy afterwards. That's just another
yes, it does. it makes it a nightmare. And so driving all of a sudden becomes risky. Walking around the roads becomes riskier. It's terrible. And I'd be like, why do you not deal with this? But this is ridiculous. We know how to deal with this in America, right? And then it was like, oh, well, Washington D.C. is brought to a standstill by some snow, and Japanese people being like, oh, I thought you said they knew how to deal with this in America, and I was like, yeah, I think I've misunderstood what's happening here, right? Like, and I think that's an important realization to have. I don't know.
Um, I think that's a good point. Start just to finish up because it's a random comment and I need to address it because I can't let
Mm-hmm.
it go. Japanese
Yes.
cars have TVs. What is
Oh
this?
yeah. Yeah, they have TVs. They have like full blown entertainment systems, usually in the center of the like I don't know what you call it, console.
So even the driver can watch TV as they're
Yes.
driving along.
Yes, it'll turn off automatically when they start driving.
Oh, okay, good. All right. Okay, I was getting really worried that people were tuning in to watch whatever while they're bombing it down the motorway or something.
Yeah, no. The Japanese people have realized that there's a potential problem if the driver is watching TV and not the road.
Wow, good. I'm really glad they made that realization.
Yes.
Interesting. So it's just when you park up and stuff, you can watch things. That's incredible.
Yep. Yep, it's wild. When I first went
Wow.
to Japan, they had this was before iPhones were a thing. And so they had the most advanced flip phones in the world. And one of the things that I experienced with the particular flip phone that I bought was first of all, you could flip it not only up vertically to open the phone, you could then turn the thing sideways so that it went like to a like widescreen 16:9 type ratio,
Oh, wow.
so you could flip it on its side, and then when it was in that position you could then watch TV broadcasts on your cell phone.
No. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness. You're just living in the
I was like, yeah, I was like,
living
what sort
10
of
years
magic
ahead.
is this? What's going on? And then the iPhone destroyed that entire like
Yeah,
technology. Yeah, it was wild. I was like, well, I like the iPhone better, but it was kind of cool to watch TV on my flip phone.
I can imagine. Yeah, yeah.
For all I know, there's a way to do it on the iPhone too. I just never cared to install it.
Wow. That's incredible. It's just when you said that, it just caught me off guard. You just said it so. Oh yeah, because the Japanese car has a TV. I was like, excuse me, what?
Yeah,
But I had to wait through all that. I mean, rightly so. That whole earthquake segment, which was a very good segment. I was like, I need to ask this question before we finish. I can't let it go.
yeah, I'm glad you came back to it. Because there are some things about like the way that Japan is structured where I'm like, I don't know how much everybody knows about this, and I don't know how much it's like weird or normal. Like TVs being in the cars, I remember being surprised by that, but I don't know if that's like a regular thing these days.
Well, I guess when you go back, you'll have to inform us in terms of do the Japanese cars still have TVs or have they
Yeah,
been removed? You'd have thought that maybe the back seats would have still have a TV screen so the kids could watch it.
yeah, maybe. Because I know they have those sorts of like displays in cars in the U.S. at least as options. Like, hey, you want a entertainment center for your kids in the back seat? We've got that in our car.
They definitely used to in the UK, but that felt like that was something that was a thing that was more like 10 years ago or more. I don't know if they do them now. I guess now
Yeah, I don't
because
know
of
either.
I guess because now everyone carries portable
Hmm.
devices that you don't need to have an inbuilt system.
Right. Yeah, they might not need to anymore. That's kind of wild.
Who needs like a DVD player slash screens in the car and all that infrastructure when people just take a tablet or a phone into the car these days?
Right.
Um,
Yeah, better to find a way for people to integrate their existing devices.
right, with Bluetooth and all that sort of thing. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Hmm.
That'd be probably a way to do it. If you still had the screens, you could have share the parents could set up whatever. So then you're not giving the phones to the kids, and they can project whatever they want, screen whatever they will, stream whatever they wanted into the backseat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh well. Good. There is still other stuff on my notes, but to be honest, I think we've gone through a huge amount, and there's nothing
Yeah.
here that is really pressing. The only other thing, not that I wrote down a huge amount about it, was just obviously it was interesting. You did your walk across Japan.
Hmm.
Chris did his 2,000 kilometer cycle across Japan.
Oh. Oh, that's
So
cool. I didn't know he did that. That's awesome.
if you want to maybe check it out, because I think he did it as a video series, but it's something that we're talking about burnout. From what I understood, I mean, again, take a pinch of salt. Is I'm trying to rely on my memory, which is not good at the best of times. He tried to do it that he would cycle and film and edit all in the same day. So he would
Oh
provide
wow.
daily updates or maybe weekly updates. And he soon discovered that that was impossible. And he was releasing
Yeah.
videos, I think, maybe up to 18 months after he'd even finished.
Yeah.
Um,
I
again,
believe that easily.
he'd promised the viewers this experience, and they're getting very confused that it was not delivered that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there is a video series. I think after this, we're gonna have to. Well, maybe not for me because it's almost 2 a.m. But maybe tomorrow morning over my breakfast, I'm gonna check it out and see. It's very possible on his YouTube channel there's a video series of it.
Cool.
So I don't know the exact route and how exactly that matches up with the distance that you walked. If there's any differences or not, but he did a similar thing.
What did you say the distance was?
I wrote down 2,000 kilometers. That's what I've got down in my
Okay.
notes.
I think I probably ended up going a little bit further, but I picked a weird route. I did not
Ooh.
pick like an optimized route.
And you did it walking, just saying.
Yeah. Well, I actually think it's probably harder to cycle it.
It'd be more intensive, but the long. I mean,
Yeah.
yours
You
obviously
get it
took
done.
much longer,
Yeah,
right?
you get it done way faster, but yeah.
And more intense.
Hmm.
And I guess, but you probably saw more along the way, right?
Yeah.
You were able to soak in a lot more things and explore more. Um,
In theory.
in theory.
I'd be interested. Yeah, I'd be interested to read about Chris Broad's perspective because a lot of my experience of walking Japan, in part because I'm not really into any sort of like nightlife or partying or anything like that, was I'd walk for 8 hours a day and then I'd go into an inn and spend the night. And here and there, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to go out today and do stuff, or I'm going to set aside today as a rest day and I'm going to get stuff. I'm going to like do touristy things. And there were certain spots along the route where I was like, I'm deliberately going to do things here. But outside of that, there were a lot of days where my experience was just the experience of walking, which I was fine with, but it doesn't necessarily make for the, most uh I don't know, eventful account of walking or
Hmm.
traveling across Japan.
But I guess that's why then it suits a sort of a more shorter blog type, where you can also then
Yeah.
incorporate a bit more in terms of like you can express your own sort of personal feelings and things rather than a sort of a video diary. Maybe it suits that a little bit better.
Yeah. I think that's fair. Yeah. I also just believe that busyness is not entirely, but to a large degree, like a state of mind. You can
Yes.
be busy and preoccupied on a walk as much as you can be busy and preoccupied in a car. And it's easy to think, oh, if I'm going slower and walking, I'm taking things in and being attentive and like taking it slow. That is not necessarily the case. You can absolutely walk around for half an hour and not take anything in.
Right, because you're lost in your own thought. I guess it depends on what
Yeah.
type of person you are, but I know I get lost in my own thoughts quite a lot. I'm not necessarily paying attention to what's around me, apart from
Hmm.
immediate safety.
Yeah.
But I mean, even I know, like just walking around the town I'm living in now, sometimes I'll just look up and I'll see a building and go, "That building's really pretty. I've walked past this 50 times. I've never noticed." 'Cause I'm just
Hmm.
in my own thoughts or listening to music or doing something else, and you're not fully paying attention to what's around you. But it's a different
Yep.
experience. So I think, if I remember rightly from the book, there wasn't a huge amount of detail about the journey. It was
Hmm.
more about his sort of trials and tribulations in terms of trying to portray that journey and story to
Yeah.
the YouTube audience.
Yeah. I
From what
imagine
I
that was really
remember.
hard.
From
I
what I
imagine that
remember.
was, yeah, really hard to do. I remember because when I was going to walk Japan, I was like, I'm going to keep a journal of the whole trip. I kept a journal for like 5 days, and I kept trying to update it, and I just got further and further behind, and eventually I was like, I have to give up. So I've got the journal still, and I've got, the first part of the trip is, pretty well documented in it, and then it just gets more and more sparse until finally it's like, okay, well, it's been like a week since I had this experience, and I just have to give up. And it's it's very easy to make plans that you can't follow through on that way because you do not expect like to be as worn out as you are.
Right. Right.
Having doing that all the day, all the time.
Yeah,
And
funny that walking 8 to 10 hours a day actually takes it out of you.
it really does. The funny thing is eventually you start to like adjust. So by the end of the trip, it was just like, okay, yeah, like, oh, 6 hours. This was a short day. What's some more stuff I can do? But at the beginning, it's killing you. Um, and the other thing about it is like just because you're like walking around and open to experiences, like sometimes you're just in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes there's nothing to do. Not always. And I do think like one of the books that inspired me to go on the Walk of Japan, um, the author subsequently wrote it was one particular author, Alan Booth, who walked all of Japan and wrote a book about it, and then subsequently went on a bunch of other shorter, like adventurous type walks around the country and wrote about those. And in his later book, which was called Looking for the Lost, which I actually prefer to his book about walking the length of Japan, which is called The Roads to Sata. Um, but in the second book, he talked about someone who had read his first book, The Roads to Sata, and was like, oh, so this is just like your detailing of a 2,000-mile pub crawl. And he was like, you're really not taking this in the experience that it should be, because the heart of Japan and having that experience is sitting down and having a beer and like meeting the people along the way. Like that's what builds those experiences. And, you know, me being an introvert, I don't have those experiences. I don't sit down with anyone and have beers. I get in the bath and go to bed. So like and it's one of the sort of things that I've encountered with travel writing is a lot of it really is like what's the story of these people you met along the way. And even when I tell my story of walking Japan, the things that stand out, it's the people I did meet along the way, even though I'm an introvert, right?
Hmm.
So it's sort of funny how that works. So yeah, I am absolutely glad to have had the experience, but it surprises you. It's not what you think it's going to be. And my particular experience, I don't think at this point in my life, I don't think it makes a great story, but I'm glad I had it.
It's something you can tell people, right? That you know it for yourself that you did it, which is
Mm-hmm.
always the personal satisfaction is great. I mean, it's really good then, even though you weren't able to keep up with the journal, that you had those photographic records and you knew the route that you took, so you're able to write that blog all those years
Yes. Oh man,
later.
I ended up being so glad that I could just take photos. And like, I imagine if Chris Broad hadn't promised a bunch of people he was going to be uploading videos, he'd be able to just look at those videos later on and be like, "Oh, this was so great," because he could recall the experience.
Hmm. So it'd be, I'm gonna have to go and try and find that if there's a dedicated playlist or something to it. Because it might be especially for you to see the route that you took relative to his, and then see if how much overlap there is and all that stuff.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah, I'd
know
be curious about that.
the time frame he took to do that trip either. So yeah, it'd be intriguing. So I'll try and dig that out.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think as I said, personally, if this podcast has gone on long enough, you need your dinner. I need sleep.
Yep.
But I think also too, I think it's everything that I've wanted to go through, the really big things, um, have uh, have been covered. So
Excellent.
very enjoyable. I don't know how long in total, 7 hours of chat about this book that I just randomly picked up in a bookstore over the summer. So
Yeah, I'm
it's
excited to give it a shot now that we've had our podcast episodes on it. I was sort of holding off because I wanted to give my initial reactions on the podcast, but now I can actually read the book for myself. Should be nice.
absolutely. And then if there's anything else that you see that or you read once you do get round to it, I know you're also reading. There'll be a topic for another podcast, but I know you're reading through the Rebus series of books at the moment. Um,
Yes. And
uh,
I've started revisiting Jane Austen because we've been talking about her and the podcast, and I was like, I haven't read Jane Austen in a while. So now I'm reading this series of books that have been annotated by like a scholar who is a specialist in like the time period she lived in and her work, and fascinating experience. But
oh,
again, that's something for maybe another podcast.
I have to tell Mrs. Scott Sword she'll be very proud to hear that. She's a big fan of Jane Austen.
Awesome.
Um,
Yeah, if she hasn't read the David Shepard annotations, I've only just started the one for Northanger Abbey, but I recommend them.
Oh, I don't think she's seen those, but I do remember for one of her birthdays, I bought the entire collection for her, and they were. I'm gonna have to find them and take a picture for you. They've got like a particular sort of cover to them, so they're all thematically all the same theme,
Nice.
and they come in a nice little box. There was another one that she wanted, um, and I remember the look when she opened it on her birthday or Christmas,
Mm.
whatever it was, and she was like, "This wasn't the collection that I," because she gave me subtle hints, not subtle at all, about what she wanted. But I'd read reviews that when it got, because I had to get it through Amazon, there was no other way to find it, at least over here. And
Hmm.
because Amazon likes to put stickers in places where then it's actually in
Yeah.
contact with the product, it's not on like a
Hmm.
cellophane, and people were taking off the label or the sticker, it would actually remove the cover, the
Hmm.
sort of the printing on the book. And I didn't want a situation where I got that for her and then it would instantly get ruined. So I bought a different
Right.
one that would be safer in that sense. And she was
Hmm.
very happy with it. So I'll have to dig them out and take a picture and send them over.
Cool.
But yeah, I don't know what we'll talk about next. We'll go through our list. But I just
Yep.
want to quickly.
Language learning's high up on the possibilities, but we'll see what happens. We never quite know.
We never know. We'll see what we're in the mood for. But I think that'd be a nice
Hmm.
logical thing to go for. I guess it depends on when I get like the exam results. I just want to say to people because I guess it depends on when we see that. I mean, we're assuming this podcast will come out at the beginning of January. Um,
Hmm.
it might come out middle of December. We just have to play it by ear. But either way, if it's in January, then I hope everybody listening to this, if you've made it this far, that you've had a good Christmas period. I also know that Christmas can be a bit of a sticky period for some people. So
Hmm.
I hope you've had a good time. And if Christmas is a difficult period for you, then I hope that you've been kept company and you found ways to sort of distract yourself through it. And then if this comes out in the middle of December, then I hope that the Christmas period is um, is great. Or you've got
Yeah, I
plans to
will
cope with it.
echo those sentiments. We've got what was it? Something like a combined 7 hours
Yeah, plenty of stuff
between
to
the
keep you
two
company.
episodes that are going to be coming out. So hopefully that's helped keep you company. Hopefully you haven't been turned off by our strange, meandering conversations and weird detours that we take.
There's plenty to go back and listen to as well. If you've missed some episodes, just go onto the channel. There'll be a playlist in the description as well, and you can go back and listen to any of our conversations. They're always there. That'll be a year, almost a year anniversary of this series as well.
Yeah,
The first one came out over Christmas time last year, so crazy
right.
stuff.
Because that was your inspiration for knowing that sometimes that can be a difficult period for people, and
Absolutely.
absolutely perfect for videos to keep you company.
Indeed. So yeah, I hope everyone's doing well. Feel free to leave comments if there's anything you want us to discuss or anything you found interesting. Then feel free to leave it below. We do always read the comments. There might be a delay for us to respond to them actually inside the podcast, but we'll always reply in person when we see the comments. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the episode, and yeah, I guess we'll see you very soon for another one. So yeah, take care until then. Rook, thank you very much. Always a pleasure.
Likewise, thank you, Scott Sword.
And yeah, take care, folks. See you again
All
soon.
right,
Hope you've
bye.
enjoyed the sights of Edinburgh as well.